of September. Thank you. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, second reading.
Thank you. I need to inform the House that the reasoned amendments have not been selected. And before I ask the Foreign Secretary to move the second reading, I do want to reiterate how important it is for members who wish to speak in the debate to be here at the beginning, to hear all the opening speeches, to stay in the chamber for the vast majority of the debate, and to be there certainly for the wind-ups and to be there in good time. It's very discourteous not to follow those rules, especially on an important debate like this. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss to move the second reading.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that the bill be now read a second time. We are taking this action to uphold the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which has brought peace and political stability to Northern Ireland. The Northern Ireland Protocol is undermining the functioning of the agreement and of power sharing. It has created fractures between East and West. It has diverted trade and meant people in Northern Ireland are being treated differently from people in Great Britain. It has weakened their economic rights. This has created a sense that parity of esteem between different parts of the community, an essential part of the agreement, has been damaged. This bill will address these political challenges and fix the practical problems the protocol has created. It avoids a hard border and protects the integrity of the UK and the EU single market. It is necessary because the growing issues in Northern Ireland, including on tax and on customs, are baked into the protocol itself. Our preference remains a negotiated solution, and the bill contains a provision that allows for negotiated agreement. But the EU has ruled out upfront making changes to the text of the protocol. I'll give way to an honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to the Foreign Secretary, and I congratulate her on her very patient and good diplomacy. Will she confirm that this very moderate measure is completely legal and essential to the peace and goodwill of Northern Ireland?
I can absolutely confirm to my right honourable friend that this bill is both necessary and legal, and the government has published a legal statement setting it out. I'll make a bit more progress and then I'll allow some further interventions. We continue to raise the issues of concern with our European partners, but we simply cannot allow this situation to drift. Northern Ireland has been without a devolved government since February, due specifically to the protocol, at a time of major global economic challenges. Therefore, it is the duty of this government to act now to enable a plan for restored local government to begin. It is both legal and necessary. This bill fixes the specific problems that have been caused in Northern Ireland, whilst maintaining those parts of the protocol that are working. It fixes problems in 4 areas: customs and SPS, a dual regulatory model, subsidy control and VAT, and governance. On customs and SPS, the bill creates a green and red lane system. All those trading into Northern Ireland will be part of a trusted trader scheme. Goods destined for Northern Ireland will not face customs bureaucracy. Goods for the Republic of Ireland and the EU will go through full EU-style border procedures. And all data for both the green and red lanes will be shared with the EU in real time as the goods depart from Great Britain. This means the EU will have this data before the goods arrive in Northern Ireland, ensuring that the EU single market is protected. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Can I thank the Secretary of State for bringing this forward and for her comprehensive understanding of the position of many people in Northern Ireland. Someone who has had businesses contacting him from those who have openly stated they are from a nationalist tradition and yet feel afraid to voice complaints to their own MPs, as an example, due to fear of reprisal. that I speak with confidence, and I can assure the Secretary of State of this issue, that Northern Ireland as a whole needs this bill, not simply for cultural identity, which is imperative for financial viability for the small businesses and the effects of the EU's vindictive approach to block VAT and state aid. Really, Secretary of State, this bill is long overdue.
Just to say that interventions should be fairly brief, because we've got a lot of people wanting to speak in this debate. Foreign Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I was talking about the data that we are sharing with the EU. And I'm pleased to say that we already have this system in place. We're giving demonstrations to businesses and the EU to show how it works, and I'm very happy to make those demonstrations available to members of Parliament as well. Any trader violating the lanes will face penalties and would face ejection from the scheme. I'll give way to the honourable friend.
I'm extremely grateful to the Foreign Secretary for giving way, and I have an immense amount of sympathy with what she is saying. And it does seem to me that the EU is not being particularly constructive in trying to get the solution that we all want to see achieved. But can I say to her that many of us are extremely concerned that the bill brazenly breaks a solemn international treaty, it trashes our international reputation, it threatens a trade war at a time when our economy is flat, and it puts us at odds with our most important ally. Can she say anything to reassure me in my anxieties on these points?
Well, as I said at the outset, our preference is for a negotiated solution, and we have sought a negotiated solution for 18 months. But as recently as last weekend, the EU have refused to change the text of the protocol. That is why there is strong legal justification, as set out in our legal statement, for us taking this action, because our priority as the United Kingdom government has to be political stability within our own country. And whilst we put this bill through Parliament, we will continue to seek a negotiated solution with the EU, and in fact there are provisions of the bill to deliver it. So I would strongly encourage my right honourable friend to raise this with the EU directly and to encourage a negotiated solution, because there is a solution to be achieved. We have laid it out very clearly with our red and green lane proposal, but we do need the EU to agree to change the text of the protocol. That is the fundamental issue that needs to be addressed. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
Grateful to her for giving way. The government's legal position praise and aid the international law doctrine of necessity, but the International Law Commission says that where a state has itself contributed to the situation of necessity, that doctrine can't be prayed in aid. Now, given that the Prime Minister signed the withdrawal agreement, including the protocol, in the knowledge that it would give rise to precisely the difficulties of which they now complain, which we debated on the floor of this House, doesn't she see that there's a pretty big hole in the legal advice that she's been given?
Well, we set out the case extremely clearly in the legal advice, and the doctrine of necessity has been used by other governments in the past where there is a severe issue and the other party is unwilling to renegotiate that treaty. And that is the position that we are in with the Northern Ireland Protocol. And what I would say to the Honourable Lady, and indeed other members on the opposition benches, is given the EU refuse to reopen the Northern Ireland Protocol, and those issues, such as customs and tax, are specifically baked in, what is their solution to dealing with the real issues in Northern Ireland? We have looked at all the alternative solutions, and the only solution that is effective is this Northern Ireland Protocol bill, in the absence of the EU being willing to negotiate a new protocol. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I'm most grateful to my right honourable friend. She could also point out that the protocol itself contains provisions for it to be changed, and the EU refuses to contemplate using those provisions. And may I also just point out that at the time we signed the protocol, we did not know the shape of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and it was reasonable to expect the EU to give mutual recognition of products and standards and mutual recognition of SPS standards, as, for example, they have with New Zealand, and they refuse to give us those provisions. The problems in the protocol would be much less if they had given us a better trade deal.
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right about the fact that the protocol isn't set in stone. And this is why, for the past 18 months, this government has sought to achieve negotiated changes in the protocol. But in the absence of the EU being willing to change the text, the only way to resolve this is for us to legislate. Now, I'm going to make more progress, and then I will take more interventions. We fully understand and respect the legitimate concerns of the EU that the single market should be protected, and our solution does just that. The bill will also establish a dual regulatory regime so businesses can choose between meeting UK and EU standards. This removes the barriers to goods made to UK standards for being sold in Northern Ireland, and it cuts the processes that drive up costs for business. It prevents unnecessary divergence between two parts of the UK internal market, and anyone who trades into the EU single market will still have to do so according to EU standards. The bill will also ensure that the government can set UK-wide policies on subsidy control and VAT, overcoming constraints that have meant Northern Ireland hasn't benefited from the same support as the rest of the UK. For example, at present, people in Northern Ireland are not able to benefit from the VAT cuts on solar panels that the Chancellor announced in the spring statement. These are essential functions of any 21st century state, but they're especially important in Northern Ireland, where the UK government plays an outsized role in the local economy. We will maintain, I'll give way in a minute, we will maintain the arrangements in the protocol on VAT which support trade on the island of Ireland, while ensuring Northern Ireland can still benefit from the freedoms and flexibility available in Great Britain. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
I'm grateful for giving way. I wonder if she understands why so many people would accuse this government of the most rank hypocrisy. First of all, this is a predictable outcome of the agreement that they negotiated when they didn't give a fig for the situation in Northern Ireland, quite frankly. Secondly, if they were serious about negotiations, they could be using Article 16. And thirdly, at the very same time that the Prime Minister is glad-handing G7 leaders in Bavaria and extolling the virtues of a rules-based international system, his own government at home is riding a horse and coaches through a rules-based system. Does she understand the concerns we have, and what kind of reputation is the UK going to have on a global stage as a result?
Well, as I made clear, we are very clear that the Belfast Good Friday Agreement should have primacy. The fact is it has been undermined over the past 2 years, and we can see that in the fact that the institutions of Northern Ireland aren't up and running, and that is why the government needs to act. And we're doing so in a reasonable and legal way. I'll give way on my...
I'm very grateful for my right honourable friend to give way, and I accept entirely her desire to achieve a negotiated settlement if at all possible. I know how much work has gone into that. But taking her back to the legal point, she will know that the application of the doctrine of necessity requires both the legal tests being met, but also the evidential base, because it's largely fact-specific to show whether or not those tests have in fact been made. I know that the government has been working hard to assemble that evidential base. But can she tell us as to when that evidential base is going to be available to the House so that we can form a judgment as to whether or not those legal tests are met, and that therefore proportionality and necessity is actually met? It would be very helpful to have that, perhaps before we come to a conclusion on the bill.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for that point. There are clearly very, very severe issues in Northern Ireland, including the fact that the institutions in Northern Ireland aren't up and running, which means that the UK has to act and cannot allow this situation to drift. And I don't think, Madam Deputy Speaker, we've heard from the opposition about what their alternative would be, apart from simply hoping that the EU might suddenly negotiate or come up with a new outcome. I'll give way. Maybe the Honourable Lady can give us an idea about what her alternative plan is.
Over the past 6 years, I've given several alternatives, including as a shadow minister. My question to the Secretary of State is: she talks about the institutions. Can she give the House today the details on the agreement she has secured from the political parties in Northern Ireland that they will return to Stormont on the completion, or even indeed the completion of second reading, any point during the committee stage, or on third reading? What in this bill has secured that going back, and what role is there for anybody in Northern Ireland with the powers going to the Minister of the Crown?
Well, I note the Honourable Lady hasn't come up with any alternatives to this bill to be able to move the situation forward. And the approach we have taken with the 4 areas that I'm currently talking through is we've identified what the practical problems are for the people of Northern Ireland, and we have come up with solutions that address those problems whilst protecting the EU single market. And it is our expectation that the passage of this bill will result in the institutions being re-established. I will, Madam Deputy Speaker, make progress on talking through the elements of the bill, and then I'm very happy to accept further interventions later on in this debate. The bill will ensure that the Government can set UK-wide policies on subsidy control and VAT, overcoming the constraints that have meant Northern Ireland hasn't benefited from the same support of the rest of the UK, as I mentioned. It will also maintain the arrangements in the protocol on VAT which support trade on the island of Ireland, whilst ensuring Northern Ireland can still benefit from the freedoms and flexibilities available in Great Britain. It will remove the role of the European Court where it is not appropriate, including its role as the final arbiter of disputes. This is in line with normal international dispute resolution provisions, including in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. The bill will also enable courts to seek an opinion from the European Court on legitimate questions of the interpretation of EU law, ensuring that it can still be applied for the purposes of North-South trade. The Belfast Good Friday Agreement is based on consent from both communities. All unionist parties have cited the European Court as a main cause of a major democratic deficit. Together with VAT and state aid rules, it causes unionists to feel less connected and less part of the UK. This is not a hypothetical issue. The European Court has already become one of the most controversial elements of the protocol, threatening to disrupt everyday lives. The EU has brought infraction proceedings against the UK in 5 areas, covering issues like parcels and transporting pets. And to be absolutely clear, the bill only changes the parts of the protocol that are causing the problems and undermining the 3 strands of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Very grateful to the Foreign Secretary. It's a very short question, really, which is simply this. She says that the bill is legal. Lots of other people disagree with her, including lots of very eminent lawyers, both in this country and elsewhere. Which body will arbitrate on that decision as to whether this bill is legal?
Parliament. Well, we have published our government legal statement, which clearly states the reasons that this bill is legal and the necessity of pursuing this bill. And I do return to my point about the lack of alternatives being proposed by the opposition. We have exhausted all the other avenues, and this remains the course of action that is actually going to deliver for the people of Ireland, Northern Ireland, and re-establish the institutions. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank the honourable lady for giving way. And there's a lot of talk about international law here. Can I take her to Clause 3 of Article 2 of the UN Charter that says all members shall settle their international disputes by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered. That's incumbent on us and the EU, and they need to engage with us and negotiate in order that peace is not threatened.
Well, my honourable friend is right, and it is very clear from the legal advice that one of the issues is that the EU won't change the text of the protocol, even though when the protocol was negotiated, it was very clear that it wasn't set in stone, that it should be subject to change because of the very unique situation in Northern Ireland. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are very clear that there are elements of the protocol that are working and that we do want to maintain. We'll maintain the conditions for North-South cooperation and trade and uphold the common travel area. We'll maintain the functioning of the single electricity market, which benefits both the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And the bill provides specific powers to implement technical regulations as part of our solution. And today we launched consultation with businesses to make sure that the way this bill is implemented works for the people of business in Northern Ireland, and will continue consulting with businesses and the EU over the coming weeks to make sure the implementation works.
On that point, one of the fundamental purposes of this long-awaited bill is to uphold the critical Good Friday Agreement, which, as the whole House knows, completely underpins the maintenance of peace and political stability in Northern Ireland. That being the case, for those who follow this matter closely, including in the United States, we should confirm that one of the strongest advocates for action on this has indeed been Lord Trimble, the Nobel laureate who helped to negotiate the Good Friday Agreement in the first place.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right. We all know how hard-won peace and political stability in Northern Ireland was, and we all know how important it is that the Belfast Good Friday Agreement is upheld and is not undermined. And that is the discussion I've been having with colleagues in the United States, around the world, and those who experience the situation in Northern Ireland fully understand how important it is we act and cannot allow this situation to drift on. I know there are those across the House who want to give negotiation more time. The problem we face is we've already been negotiating for 18 months. We have a negotiating partner who is refusing to change the text of the protocol. Meanwhile, we have a worsening situation in Northern Ireland. So it is firmly the view of this government that we need to act. And we are pursuing this legislation as all other options have been exhausted. Our first choice was, and remains, renegotiating the protocol text with the EU. And this is in line with the evolution of other treaties, which happens all the time. For example, both the EU and the UK are currently renegotiating changes to the Energy Charter Treaty. Given the unique nature of Northern Ireland and the unprecedented nature of these arrangements, it was always likely that flexibility would be needed. In fact, this flexibility was explicitly acknowledged in the protocol itself. But despite the fact that we have been pursuing these renegotiations, we have not seen the flexibility needed from the EU. As recently as this weekend, the EU said it will not renegotiate the text of the protocol. And members across the House will have seen that the EU put forward proposals last year and again a fortnight ago. I think it's worth pointing out that those proposals will actually leave the people and businesses of Northern Ireland worse off than the current standstill arrangements. Their proposals would make the situation worse on the ground, adding further to the tensions and stresses of the situation. So goods going solely to Northern Ireland would still face customs paperwork and SPS certificates. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you. Would my right honourable friend agree that this bill is born out of necessity to act in our national interest, to provide for a permanent solution to a temporary measure, to preserve the Belfast Agreement, to preserve the constitutional settlement that keeps Northern Ireland as part of the UK and prevent a democratic deficit, and a necessity to use international law to safeguard, protect our essential interests whilst protecting those of the EU?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and we still face a situation where the EU have refused to change the text of the protocol, and their proposals do not even address many of the issues of concern, namely over governance, subsidies, manufactured goods and VAT. And without dealing with those very real issues for the people of Northern Ireland, we're not going to see the balance of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement restored. We're not going to see the cross-community support that we need to get the political institutions back up and running. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Grateful to the Foreign Secretary. The Foreign Secretary knows that the three things that need to be resolved are the friction with trade, repairing the harm to our constitutional position within this country, and erasing the democratic deficit at the heart of the protocol. And the Foreign Secretary has fairly outlined the myriad of steps that this government have taken, and that this bill is required. It can have our support in resolving these issues. But the Foreign Secretary will also hear a lot of opposition from this side of the House. In hearing that opposition from colleagues to my right and my left, can she identify one of them who advocated using Article 16 or the provisions of the protocol, or have they simply no issue with trying to resolve the issues that are affecting the people of Northern Ireland today?
Well, the honourable gentleman makes a very good point, and those who are advocating further negotiation with the EU do need to persuade the EU to change their negotiating mandate so that the text of the protocol can change, because we know that those specific issues, like the customs bureaucracy, like the VAT, can only be addressed by addressing the text of the protocol itself. And I wanted to come on to the specific point the honourable gentleman made about Article 16. Of course, we have looked at triggering Article 16 to deal with this issue. However, we came to the conclusion that it would not resolve the fundamental issues in the protocol. It's only a temporary measure, and it would only treat some of the symptoms without fixing the root cause of the problems which are baked into the protocol text itself. It could also lead to attrition and litigation with the EU while not delivering sufficient change. Now, I want to be clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, we don't rule out using Article 16 further down the line if the circumstances demand it, but in order to fix the very real problems in Northern Ireland, in order to get the political institutions back up and running, the only solution that is effective and provides the comprehensive and durable solution is this bill. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful to the Foreign Secretary for giving way, and I suspect that when she was campaigning for Britain to remain in the European Union, she never in a million years thought she'd be standing here proposing a bill of this sort. In the light of the comment she has just made about Article 16, why is the government not proposing to use the legal method to raise these questions with the European Union through the treaty that it signed, rather than one claiming necessity, when the Foreign Secretary is yet to give me a single example where the British government has claimed necessity for abrogating a treaty that it has negotiated and signed?
Well, Madam Speaker, the reason I'm putting this bill forward is because I'm a patriot and I'm a Democrat. And our number one priority is protecting peace and political stability in Northern Ireland and protecting the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And nothing the honourable gentleman has suggested will achieve that end. Madam Deputy Speaker, I will finish off my remarks. The only way that we will uphold the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and fix the problems in Northern Ireland is to pass this legislation. And we've heard on the opposite side of the House all kinds of complaining about the solution we're putting forward, but we've heard no alternative solution that will deliver. We've heard no alternative solution that will deliver. I want to be very clear. This is not my preferred choice. But in the absence of a negotiated solution, we have no other choice. There is no need for the EU to react negatively. They will be no worse off as a result of this legislation. These issues are very small in the context of the single market, but they are critically important for Northern Ireland. I'll give way.
I'm very grateful. The Foreign Secretary knows that I have grave concerns about her bill. But could I ask her just to coolly reflect upon praying in aid patriotism as a defence of it? Is she seriously impugning the patriotism of colleagues across this House who have concerns about her bill? I find that a false conflation.
I was directly responding to the point of the honourable gentleman asking me why I had campaigned one way in the referendum, and now I'm working to make sure that the Brexit negotiation that we achieved works for the people of Northern Ireland. And that is because I believe in the union of the United Kingdom. I believe in the relationship between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and I want to resolve those issues. And all I am pointing out, Madam Deputy Speaker, to colleagues around this House is that I have negotiated in good faith with the European Union, but they have refused to change the text of the protocol. I have looked at all the options, including triggering Article 16, to see whether that would work to resolve the very serious issues in Northern Ireland, and I have come to the genuine conclusion that they will not. As I've said, these solutions work for the people. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. Will the Secretary of State now commit that never again will a government stand at that dispatch box and change the Act of Union in a way which is detrimental to this United Kingdom that we all adhere to and all admire? And will she also confirm that over 300 hours have been spent in negotiations with the EU and they have resisted any change whatsoever, such as their animosity towards Northern Ireland?
Well, the very clear reason we are acting now is that there has been a refusal to change the text of the protocol that is causing the very real problems in Northern Ireland. And as I've said, these issues are very small in the context of the single market, but they are critically important for the people of Northern Ireland, and that is in whose interest we act in putting through this bill. Once this legislation is enacted, we can draw a line under this issue and unleash the full potential of our relationship with the EU. Fundamentally, we share a belief in democracy, in freedom, and the right of all countries to self-determination. We are natural allies in an increasingly uncertain and geopolitical world. I won't give way anymore. I'm almost at the end of my remarks. The House will be pleased to hear. We want to work with the EU for the betterment, not just of Europe, but the world, and to focus all of our efforts on tackling external threats like Putin's Russia. Once this legislation is through, we will have a solution that helps restore the balance between the communities and uphold the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. That is the purpose of this bill, and I commend it to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lamb.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Less than 3 years ago, the Prime Minister stood at that dispatch box seeking to persuade the House to support the withdrawal agreement and that he had negotiated it with the European Union. It was, he said, a great deal for England, for Scotland, for Wales and Northern Ireland. He urged each of us to show, and I quote, the same breadth of vision our European neighbours had with whom he had struck the agreement. He reassured us that, above all, we and our European friends have preserved the letter and the spirit of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. His deal, he argued, was in perfect conformity with the Good Friday Agreement. Today, 18 months after it came into the force, the government is taking a wrecking ball to its own agreement.
I thank him
For giving way, and I refer to the comments that were made by the member for Leeds. Indeed, a very good proposal that was made just a few moments ago, that he would trigger and should trigger Article 16. Is the opposition, Her Majesty's opposition, agreeing with that proposal? Does the Shadow Secretary believe that Article 16 should be triggered and triggered now?
Well, can I say to the right honourable gentleman, this opposition thinks that there is a better way forward through negotiation, but at least the proposition he suggests is legal, and I'll come on to that in a moment. I will give way.
I'm grateful. Given that in all this the most important thing is peace and getting power sharing up and running, will the right honourable gentleman acquaint the House with the discussions he's had with the DUP as to what his solution is to resolving this issue, given that they are refusing to rejoin power sharing unless a protocol has been dealt with? I'm sure the honourable gentleman has discussed this with the DUP. Will he acquaint the House with this problem?
Can I say that the DUP, in our discussions, has consistently said that they wanted a negotiated settlement until this bill was published today. I'll make some progress. In so doing, and it is doing so, and
point of order, Ian Paisley, but I do hope this isn't a way of disrupting the debate.
Order, Madam Deputy Speaker. Is it in order for the Shadow Secretary of State to indicate that he has had negotiations with the Democratic Unionist Party when no such negotiations have taken place?
All they say is no.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his point of order. Needs to sit down. The honourable gentleman knows that he's well capable of asking to intervene again on the Shadow Secretary of State, if that's what he wishes to do. It really does undermine our debates if we just constantly come up with these endless points of order that interrupt the debate, and it's really not a fair way to do it. The honourable gentleman is trying to catch my eye later, and I really suggest that we try to respect each other in the chamber. David Lammy.
I won't give way. I'm going to make some progress. Madam Deputy Speaker, in bringing this bill to the House, the government is doing so because it objects to the text that it negotiated and the choices that it freely made. It's asking each member of this House to vote for a bill that flouts international law. Madam Deputy Speaker, that is never a proposition that should be put to honourable members. This bill is damaging and counterproductive. The strategy behind it is flawed. The legal justification for it is feeble. The precedent it sets is dangerous, and the timing could hardly be worse. It divides the United Kingdom and the European Union at a time when we should be pulling together against Putin's war on the continent, and it risks causing new trade barriers during a cost of living crisis. I will give way.
Very grateful. The protocol makes very clear the primacy of the Good Friday Agreement for peace in Northern Ireland and says that the EU will respect our internal market. They are doing neither. What is his policy to persuade them to do so?
Negotiate. Just as this opposition did to get the Good Friday Agreement. We negotiate. You do not break international law and alienate our partners and allies, not just in Europe but across the world. And the honourable gentleman should know better. Madam Deputy Speaker, as we debate this bill, we should ask ourselves some simple questions. First, will this bill resolve the situation in Northern Ireland? Second, is it in the best interests of our great country? And third, is it compatible with our commitment to the rule of law? And let me take each in turn. I won't give way at this moment. You should just wait. Let's deal with Northern Ireland first as context. None of us in this House doubt the situation in Northern Ireland is serious. On this side of the House, we need no reminder of the importance of the Good Friday Agreement, one of the proudest achievements of a Labour government, achieved together with parties and communities across Northern Ireland and the Irish government in Dublin. It was the result of hard work and compromise, of graft and statesmanship, a relentless focus on the goal of peace. It was born 6 months after Bloody Sunday. For more than half of my lifetime, Northern Ireland endured the pain and violence of conflict and division. More than 3,500 people were killed. Thousands more were injured. Cities and communities riven by intolerance and division. I remember what this conflict brought to my own city, from the Baltic Exchange attack to the Docklands bombing. And Madam Deputy Speaker, above that door and others, to this very chamber, are plaques to Erin Neve, to Ian Gow, to Sir Anthony Berry, to Robert Bradford, and most recently to Sir Henry Wilson. Nearly a quarter of a century has passed since that hopeful Easter in 1998. Since then, we've seen transformational progress. A generation has grown up in a new Northern Ireland, harvesting the fruits of a hard-won peace. That legacy demands that all of us act with the utmost responsibility and sensitivity. We need calm heads at this moment and responsible leadership. We recognise that the operation of the protocol and the barriers and checks that were inherent to its design have created new tensions that do need to be addressed. Unionists feel that their place in the UK is threatened, and we must listen to all concerns of all sides. We all want to see power sharing restored. Both the UK government and the European Union and parties across Northern Ireland need to show willing and to act in good faith. But at its most fundamental level, Madam Deputy Speaker, the bill will not achieve its objectives. This House cannot impose a unilateral solution when progress demands both sides agreeing. This is not an act of good faith, nor is it a long-term solution. Only an agreement that works for all sides and delivers for people and businesses of Northern Ireland will have durability and provide the political stability that businesses crave and the public deserve. Instead, this bill will make a resolution more difficult. By breaking its obligations, the government dissolves that little trust that remains. By taking this aggressive action, we make it harder for those on the other side of the table to compromise, and on that basis alone, this bill should be rejected. I give way.
I thank the Shadow Secretary of State for giving way and recognise the comments he has made about the Belfast Agreement and the need for consensus. And he is aware that there is not a consensus in support of the protocol and never has been from day one in Northern Ireland. And I gave time, a lot of time, for the negotiations to progress, and that didn't work because the EU fundamentally refuses to change the text of the protocol. So will the Shadow Secretary of State, if he is serious about getting a solution that works, go to the EU and join the government in making the argument that they need to agree to a negotiation where they are prepared to change the text of the protocol?
Well, I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman and obviously for his experience in these matters, and indeed when the protocol was being negotiated in the first place. Can I say to him that I did meet with EU ambassadors in London last week and made that very point, and can I point him to the speech that I made last week as well, in which I highlighted exactly what he has just said. I'll give way to the honourable. I'll make some progress.
We're grateful, and I don't think anyone in this House can doubt his personal commitment to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement after the remarks he has made, and as someone whose father was nearly blown up in the Grand Hotel, I share that passion. But the problem he's got to grapple with He wants a negotiation. What if they will not negotiate? What would he do then? Because that is the position we're in. We cannot elevate the protocol to be more important than the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And that is the necessity we face.
Well, I accept the sincerity with which the Right Honourable Gentleman makes his remarks. Let me just say that they have said that trust is at an all-time low. And the question for this House is, does this maintain trust or assist with trust, given that ultimately this will be an agreement and it will be negotiated? I will give way.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend who's making a brilliant speech. Is he aware of comments from the US Trade Representative, Ambassador Tai, and indeed from Speaker Pelosi, and indeed from a host of our American allies on Congress, who have been very clear with us that there will be no US-UK trade deal unless there is a durable way forward on the Northern Ireland question. So not only does this reckless approach risk destroying relations with the EU, it risks a deal with America too.
My right honourable friend is exactly right. I have been to Washington on 3 occasions in the last 6 months, and I can say that across the political divide, Republicans and Democrats have raised this issue. And on my most recent visit, they were aghast. They had not seen the content at that stage, but they were aghast at the proposition of this bill. And perhaps the Secretary of State, when she rises to, or when he rises to conclude, might say what our American friends and allies have said in relation to this bill now that they have seen the draft. But can I just make some progress? The second point that I wanted to make is it in the best interests of this country? As we stand here today, Britain faces the worst cost of living crisis in decades. Inflation is at more than 9%. Bills are rising. Energy costs are soaring. Supply chains are under pressure. It beggars belief. Why, at this time, would the government choose to risk new frictions in our trading relations with the European Union? The government cannot get away with abdicating responsibility for this reckless conduct. If we choose to break a contract, we cannot plausibly expect the other side to take no action in response. We cannot claim that we did not foresee the consequences in advance. Of course the European Union would respond, just as we would, if the situation were reversed. And I wager that the Foreign Secretary would be one of the first people to complain if the ball was on the other foot. Madam Deputy Speaker, a game of brinkmanship with the European Union will only add to our economic problems. But it's not just about economic concerns, important though those are. We must also see the bigger picture. For 4 months, the Putin regime has fought a bloody war against Ukraine. As a parliament, we have been united in our support for Ukraine and our staunch opposition of Russia's aggression. NATO allies and European partners have stood together. How can this be the right moment to deepen a diplomatic row? How can be this the right time to tell our friends and partners that we cannot be relied on? I cannot help but note that some of the members opposite told us the situation in Ukraine was too serious. This was not the right time to change Prime Minister. But apparently, it's not serious enough to stop starting a diplomatic fight with some of our closest allies. Third, Madam Deputy Speaker, is this bill compatible with international law? Quite simply, the bill breaks international law. The bill provides for a wholesale rewrite of an international treaty in domestic law. And one of the most troubling aspects is the dangerous legal distortion that is used to justify it. The doctrine of necessity is not an excuse for states to abandon their obligations. It exists to do precisely the opposite, to constrain the circumstances when states can legitimately claim their hand has been forced. It requires this action to be the only way possible to resolve the issue. But the government has not used Article 16 and still says a negotiated solution is possible. It requires a grave and imminent peril, but the government has chosen a route that will take months of parliamentary wrangling to fix issues like unequal VAT rates that no reasonable person could consider a matter of grave peril. It requires the invoking state not to have contributed to the situation of necessity, but the problems are as a direct result of the choices that this government made when negotiating with the European Union. If they were not, we would not need to change the text of the protocol at all.
On that point, very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. He's making a very powerful speech, particularly on the legal points. He's listed all the problems with the government's legal note of advice. Does he, like me, find it interesting that whenever any of us raise these points, nobody on the benches opposite are capable of answering them?
Well, the learned lady knows that there really isn't a serious Queen's Counsel in the country that would support the use of the doctrine of necessity in the way that the government has sought to. She knows that, and I think that honourable members opposite do as well.
For the honourable gentleman, he's just, in the course of his words previously, said that indicated the government should have used Article 16. I think if I didn't hear him right, he did. He said they haven't yet used Article 16. In other words, indicating that they should use Article 16 before going down this road. But it was, in fact, the member for Sheffield Heeley, who I think is the Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary, who said, and I quote, "Triggering Article 16 will prolong and deepen uncertainty in Northern Ireland and be another huge risk to stability in Northern Ireland." Does it now mean that they should have triggered Article 16, or that they shouldn't, or maybe there is a disagreement, or maybe it won't be decided until after this bill?
Well, I think the right honourable gentleman is putting words in my mouth. Article 16 arises in relation to the defence that the government suggests of the doctrine of necessity, i.e. they haven't used it. And the point of using is at the very least it would be legal.
Exactly.
Exactly.
We wouldn't have had to, we'd have negotiated.
Pacta,
we'd have had a deal.
Madam Deputy Speaker, Pacta sunt servanda. Agreements must be kept. This is the essence of international law. The solemn promise of states acting in good faith and upholding their commitments to treaties that they have agreed. How would we react if a country we negotiated with did the same thing and simply disregarded the commitments we had mutually agreed upon them? I do not doubt that if an authoritarian state used necessity to justify its actions in breaking a treaty in the manner the government is proposing to do through this bill, the Foreign Secretary and so many of us across this House would condemn it. Since she became Foreign Secretary, the Foreign Office has issued countless statements or press releases urging others to meet their international obligations. Iran under the JCPOA, China under the Joint Declaration of Hong Kong, Russia under the Budapest Memorandum. In just the last fortnight, the Foreign Office under her leadership has publicly called on Bolivia, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Nicaragua, South Sudan, Eritrea and Ethiopia to meet their international obligations. Madam Deputy Speaker, hypocrisy is corrosive to our foreign policy, and I know members from across the House share these concerns.
I'm very grateful, but I actually take 2 points from his mention of the Budapest Accord. The first is when the UK signs a document, it needs really to stand by it. we didn't stand by the Budapest Accord either. We didn't make sure that the text was proper before we brought it to Parliament. And that's one of the reasons that we've got the problems that we're in today, isn't it?
Well, the right honourable gentleman is absolutely right. When we use the phrase honourable in this House, across this House, that means something. It's something about the integrity of this place, and it's something about the preeminent position that this Parliament and this country finds itself in on matters of international affairs. And that's why this moment is such a very sombre moment.
The honourable member for giving way. It's a thoughtful speech, and I think these matters deserve thoughtful consideration. But could he take advantage of the time at the dispatch box to tell us, would he change the protocol? If so, how he would change it, and how he thinks the process of negotiation, which has failed so far, would achieve those changes?
Well, I'll make some progress, but I've said that this party would negotiate just as we negotiated the Good Friday Agreement. I give way.
The Shadow Secretary of State has made much of the government abandoning its obligations. But surely the obligation in the protocol was designed from the EU's point of view to protect the EU single market. Now, how does this bill not give that guarantee to the EU when, first of all, goods going into the Republic will be checked? Secondly, there will be severe penalties on those who try to evade those checks. And thirdly, any firms producing in Northern Ireland will have to abide by EU rules and comply with EU rules when they're sending goods to the Republic. Surely that safeguards the single market. The obligations have been met.
Some checks are all right.
Well, I say to the gentleman, yes, it needs to be improved. The question is how is the best method to achieve that? And is breaking international law is a situation in which our EU partners don't trust us. Is that the best way? Let me just make some progress, because I've been on my feet for a long time, and lots of honourable members want to contribute to this debate. Our country's reputation is a matter, Madam Deputy Speaker, beyond party. It's hard won and easily lost. When this bill was first mooted, the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead asked, what would such a move say about the United Kingdom and its willingness to abide by treaties that it had signed? As the Right Honourable Member for Bromley and Chislehurst has said in a very thoughtful piece on this legislation last week, our country benefits greatly from our reputation for keeping our word and upholding the rule of law. We should be very wary indeed of damaging that standing. And the Honourable Member for North Thanet has said, I don't see how any Member of Parliament can vote for a breach of international law. Lord Anderson and Lord Pannick, amongst the most distinguished lawyers in the country, have called this bill a clear breach of international law. And I quote, it shows a lack of commitment to the rule of law and to a rules-based international system that damages the reputation of the United Kingdom. And Sir John Jones QC, formerly the most senior lawyer in government, has described the legal justification for this bill as, I quote, hopeless. This is, of course, the same distinguished lawyer who resigned the last time the government proposed legislation in violation of its own treaty commitments. On that occasion, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland had the temerity to tell the House the truth about the government's plan to break international law in a limited and specific way, to use his term. This bill breaks the withdrawal agreement in a broad and extensive way, while maintaining the pretence that it's somehow compliant. And I'm not sure what's worse, to be open about breaking the law or to dress it up as a treaty violation with this flimsy and transparent legal distortion. Undermining... I'll give way.
He is making a thoughtful speech. So can I ask him to confirm two things? One, can he confirm to the House he's actually read the Northern Ireland Protocol? And if he has read it, can you remind the House what Article 13.8 says about the ability to amend or even supersede the protocol entirely?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, and he's been in this House for many years like me, this is too serious for any shadow or minister not to have spent the whole weekend working hard on this bill, and he knows that. And he also knows that all of us come to this House hopeful that we can reach agreement, but very, very conscious of the law-breaking that is going forward. And so, of course, I have. Undermining international law runs counter to Britain's interest. It damages Britain's moral authority and political credibility, and it risks emboldening dictators and authoritarian states around the world. It serves the best interests of those who want to weaken the rule of law. It is unbefitting of this great country. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill not only contravenes international law, it also affords this government extraordinary powers and denies proper respect to the role of this House. 15 of the 26 clauses confer powers on government ministers. The Hansard Society, not an organisation known for hyperbole, has called the powers given to ministers breathtaking. Professor Catherine Barnard of Cambridge University has called these powers eye-wateringly broad. Ministers may use these powers whenever they feel it appropriate. Clause 22 allows them to use these powers to amend Acts of Parliament. Clause 15 gives ministers the power to disapply other parts of the protocol, even including potentially the article on democratic consent in Northern Ireland. So ministers could use secondary legislation to change not just primary law, but an international treaty. This is a power grab so broad, Madam Deputy Speaker, it would make Henry VIII blush. Clause 19 allows ministers to implement a new deal with the European Union without primary legislation. To do her own backbenchers, I ask the question. That's without primary legislation. Do her own backbenchers really want to give any Foreign Secretary that power? Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a brazen executive overreach. It's an act of disrespect to Parliament, and all MPs should reject it.
Will you give way?
I will give way.
An excellent point. One that the Secretary of State did not make herself about the power grab, but as well as disrespecting members in this House and Parliament taking back control, it is extraordinarily disrespectful of the representatives of people in Northern Ireland who have no say in this now provision at all, as the Secretary of State grabs all the power.
Well, my honourable friend makes a very, very important point, and I hope, should this bill reach committee stage, that scrutiny about the powers that she is taking for herself and denying this Parliament and Northern Ireland is properly reflected on and considered. I must make some progress because I'm very conscious that we will run out of time on this bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, as I've outlined, I believe the bill is damaging and counterproductive. I also believe it's unnecessary. We want to see checks reduced to an absolute necessary minimum, and there are practical solutions if we were to find them. Let's lower the temperature and focus on what works. For months, we've been urging the government to negotiate a veterinary agreement with the European Union that could remove the need for vast majority of the checks across the Irish Sea for goods travelling from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. Deputy Speaker, New Zealand has such an agreement. Why can't we? I do not believe it's beyond a British government to negotiate one. And that can be the basis of other steps to reduce friction, including improve data sharing. And I'm not one of those people that believes only the UK government needs to show flexibility. The EU has been too rigid as well. But the only way forward is to work hard on negotiation and compromise. I believe that with hard work and determination, with creativity and flexibility, we can overcome those challenges. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill is not the way forward. It will exacerbate the problems it hopes to solve. It will give ministers unaccountable powers. It will divide us from our friends and allies in Europe when we should be united. It damages our country's reputation. It will break international law. The rule of law is not a Labour or a Conservative value. It's our common inheritance. Since Magna Carta in 1215, it is no exaggeration to say it's one of the greatest contributions our country has made to the world. No party owns it. No government should squander it. Britain should be a country that keeps its word. Let us stand for that principle and vote against this bill tonight.
As will be very obvious to everyone here, there are many, many people who want to contribute to this debate. I don't want to put a time limit on immediately. I think one will be necessary, but it would be greatly helped if backbench colleagues could confine their remarks to a maximum of 10 minutes, and I think they will be quite popular if they manage to say anything in rather less than that. Simon Hall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, 10 minutes I'd always describe as opening remarks, and popularity is something I've always shunned. The Shadow Foreign Secretary is right. At the heart of this is trust, or the absence of it, or, as she leaves, maybe the absence of trust. Is the protocol perfect? No, it's not. So it's not a question as to whether changes should be made, but how. And there are many ways to achieve change, but this bill is not one of them. The Office of Speaker's Counsel, Madam Deputy Speaker, has provided a legal opinion to all members of the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee, which raises enormous concerns about this bill's legality. The Foreign Secretary and others have tried to conflate, have fallen into the trap of conflation, if you will, of the resurrection of devolution and the protocol. Those are two very separate and different work streams. We need to decouple them. Treaty making is reserved to this place. Devolution is the duty of the politicians of Northern Ireland. We should be able to see the resurrection of one, negotiation on the other, but to conflate them and to fall into the trap, the result of that trap being this bill, is very sad indeed. It's not a well thought out bill, it's not a good bill, it's not a constitutional bill. The integrity of the United Kingdom can only be changed via the Good Friday Agreement. The protocol and trading arrangements does not interrupt or change the constitutional integrity of the UK. So for those who try to position this as a constitutional bill, I don't agree. Would you allow me? Because I just want to make a few more statements. I think this bill is a failure of statecraft, and it puts at risk the reputation of the United Kingdom. The arguments supporting it are flimsy at best and irrational at worst. It's a bill that risks economically harmful retaliation, a bill that runs the risk of shredding our reputation as a guardian of international law and a rules-based system. How, in the name of heaven, can we expect to speak to others with authority when we ourselves shun, at a moment's notice, our legal obligation? A hard-won reputation so easily played with. I'll give way to my neighbour. For giving way. He's making a very good speech. This is, of course, permissive legislation. Meanwhile, negotiations are ongoing. He refers to a failure of statecraft. Whose failure? Well, I think it's a failure, probably of both sides, yes, but a presumption that if I don't get my own way on everything, I'm going to take my ball off the pitch. I'm going to act unilaterally. I'm going to act off my own bat. That is not the way to do it. He knows as well as I do, as a former distinguished minister at the Northern Ireland Office, most of Northern Ireland outcomes are based on compromise, of give and take, of finding the place and the path of least resistance. So it has been a failure of statecraft. I don't believe that this bill passes that international test of necessity. It has to pass all of the tests as set out in the statute, and it doesn't. So what is this bill? Is it a bargaining chip to try to browbeat the EU? Is it a bribe to honourable and right honourable members in the DUP to get back around the table at Stormont. Let me just finish what it might be, and then, of course, I will give way to him. Is it a muscle flex for a future leadership bid to sacrifice on the national on the altar our national reputation for personal ambition? Would be, I think, shameful. Of course, I'll give way to the right honourable gentleman.
I thank the chair of the Select Committee for giving way. And the honourable lady, the member for Bristol South, made a point earlier. Can I just say to the honourable member that what we have as a result of this protocol is a democratic deficit in Northern Ireland. Many of the laws that now regulate how we trade with the rest of the United Kingdom are made by a foreign entity over which we have no say whatsoever. Our VAT rates are set by that foreign entity. No taxation without representation. I don't need to be bribed to ask for what is the right of my people. Democracy. Democracy.
To the right, that's a point with which I have much sympathy and which members of the committee discussed with the Commission when we were there last December. They are aware of that, and just as Norway has ministers of the Norwegian government in Brussels week in and week out discussing those things. The EU, and he will know as well, Northern Irish business organisations are really keen to identify platforms whereby that democratic deficit can be in some way addressed. I agree with him entirely. I'm tempted to say to him, don't shout at me, shout at the ministers who advocated the protocol and that we should sign it all and support it. I'm going to make some progress, if I may.
4 minutes.
As a party, we have to be the party of the rule of law, or I must suggest we are nothing. And I think it is sad, in a way, that we have to be reminded of that. This is a power grab. All of these Henry VIII clauses. Now, if we were being asked to pass this power to ministers who were asking us to polish what was already a superlative protocol, we might have some faith. But as they've already admitted that what they've negotiated, the results of which have either caught them by surprise, or they hadn't understood the import of what they were signing up to, they hadn't quite understood the terms of the words which we were meaning. We're told to expect that they were surprised that the other side would expect us and them to fulfil the obligations that we had negotiated. Now, I would suggest that given what we can all unite upon, I have little or no doubt, given our deep understanding, all of us, of the complexities and the difficulties of the politics of Northern Ireland, to have entered into something so lightly without understanding precisely all of the details and then say, well, we're having to do this because we didn't expect the other side to do it in the way that they want us to do it, is, I think, for the birds, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is totally bonkers. They told us that having reached a difficult compromise on the final text of the protocol, the government expected the EU to do something else. So with all of the history, all we were relied upon was expectation. These Henry VIII clauses really will not stick. 17 of the clauses give unspecified powers to ministers. If was taking back control, this Parliament handing powers to the executive to use for unspecified purposes? Even worse, one of the clauses tells us that they are going to use powers to change powers that they might have changed in this bill if they subsequently think that those changes were wrong or ill-advised. I mean, it's not only just marking your own homework, it's copying somebody else's homework and then claiming all of the credit yourself. It just, of course I give way to my own friend.
I do find it astonishing, I'm grateful to him, that he's got 8 minutes into his speech and he's still not mentioned the Belfast Good Friday Agreement.
Well, my honourable friend was obviously not listening, because at the start I made very clear that the constitutional integrity of the United Kingdom is not touched by the protocol. The only, well, by definition, the only way that the constitutional integrity of Northern Ireland within our United Kingdom is contained within clauses of the Good Friday Agreement. Anybody who tries to position this protocol as, I won't if he doesn't mind because of the time, anybody who thinks that this is in some way a backdoor to a speeding up of the reunification of Ireland is, I think, is fundamentally wrong. I won't, and I know that the honourable gentleman will understand me. The argument of necessity is clearly not made. The Prime Minister himself, and I agree, wants to see this done by negotiation. There is the option to trigger Article 16 if the government thinks that the necessity is there. And if the situation is as bad as some ministers would have this House believe, one has to ask why they haven't used the emergency brake of Article 16, but have instead suggested a very calm and tranquil Sunday afternoon walk through a bicameral system of legislative progress, something which is going to take 10 months. Now, either the data is as bad as they tell us it is, which incidentally, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is not, which then requires legal rapid action, or we are just going to do this, which then just suggests to me that this is all gamemanship and muscle flexing. Belfast Port is now handling a record amount of port, 25.6 million tonnes of cargo last year. The food and drink sector is benefiting. More Irish business is buying stuff from Northern Ireland. This is good for Northern Ireland plc. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Henry VIII clauses are wrong, the purpose of the bill is wrong, the necessity isn't proven. Can I just ask my honourable and right honourable friends on this side of the House this question, which I ask sincerely? Playing fast and loose with our international reputation, playing fast and loose with our adherence to the rule of law, an executive power grab with Henry VIII clauses, pandering and giving way to some sort of political brinkmanship on one side of that very sensitive divide in Northern Ireland, which can't be afforded as a plaything. If that side of the House, if the Labour Party were on the government bench and they were doing what is contained in this bill, what would our Conservative response be? We would say that this was a party not fit for government. We would say this was a party that does not understand our traditions, respects our traditions, or understands the importance of reputation. For a fellow Tory to have to point this out to Tories, Madam Deputy Speaker, is shameful. Could I just ask my right honourable and honourable friends just to think about what this does to our party's reputation and to our nation's reputation, because both are in peril.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak, as it states on the order paper, in line with what was the basis of a reasoned amendment, namely that we believe that this bill breaks international law. We've already had to stumble our way through the consequences of a Brexit deal that was supposedly oven-ready. And quite frankly, what is proposed in this set of legislation before us today is no better. Because the fact is, Madam Deputy Speaker, if this bill does not break international law, then it's an act preparatory to doing so. Now, I'm going to start out my remarks with being as helpful as I think I can to the government here. And first of all, let me state that I hope I can understand and at least empathise with some of the concerns of people in Northern Ireland over how aspects of the protocol are working, or as they would view it, not working. And secondly, I don't consider that it's unreasonable in and of itself that in light of experience, the government should seek to try and renegotiate aspects of the deal that has taken effect. However, I'm very firmly and clearly of the view that this is absolutely not the way to go about trying to achieve that objective. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm bound to observe that although we're here to talk about a bill in the Northern Ireland Protocol, the issues here do not only affect Northern Ireland. We're subject to a withdrawal agreement which doesn't work for Scotland, or I would contend any other part of the United Kingdom either. There's much rhetoric that the government uses about a precious union, but it's a union, I'm bound to observe, under the stewardship of this government, which didn't pay a great deal of attention to the concerns or priorities of the majorities in Scotland and Northern Ireland which opposed Brexit. And if relations are to be rebalanced across these islands, whether that's cross-community in Northern Ireland or even cross-union it seems to me that some recognition of those points is long overdue by the government.
Hear, hear, hear.
Yes.
I was very fortunate, Madam Deputy Speaker, to have the honourable gentleman in my constituency where I gave him the opportunity, and I know he enjoyed it, to meet some of the unionist community groups and to meet the fishermen, to meet elected representatives. Every one of those people, and the right honourable member will remember it very well, conveyed to him that the unfairness of the Northern Ireland Protocol, the impact it was having on fishing, the impact it was having on the community, and he will know, the right honourable member will know, that the local community people that he met as well were very fearful of a future where the Northern Ireland Protocol was retained. Does he understand those issues, and would he express that in the Chamber as well?
He's just said that.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for that intervention. I recall with great fondness that visit, particularly the discussions we were able to have in Portavogie, and I'm extraordinarily grateful to the honourable gentleman and indeed to everybody that I met when I was last in Northern Ireland to get the chance to discuss these issues. And as I've said, I certainly hope I can empathise and understand at least some of the issues that were there, and if the honourable gentleman will allow me to make some progress, he might see where there are areas perhaps of agreement, but also inevitably some areas of divergence in that. Yes.
I'm very grateful to him, because it seems to me the fundamental issue of debate this evening is all about whether actually the EU would move on the implementation issues that they claim are the only problem. It's not an issue of renegotiation for them, it's an issue of implementation. And they've said that they believe that actually customs formalities can be reduced by about 80%, and the same with sanitary and phytosanitary checks. They believe that the expanded trusted trader scheme could solve a lot of these problems. How confident is the honourable gentleman that actually these things will be delivered, given how long this has been going on for and the effect already evident in Northern Ireland?
Oh, I thank the honourable member for Gloucester for that intervention. It certainly appears to me that there is a potential landing zone there between what has been proposed by the European Union, and indeed there's a bit of an overlap with what has been proposed by the UK government. I would offer to come along with ministers, but they might feel that reinforcements had arrived and somehow weakened their position. But nevertheless, there ought to be a landing zone here for those of goodwill and good faith. Now, I have to say, though, Madam Deputy Speaker, that even as a supporter of Scottish independence, I find it utterly inconceivable that any unionist government would have signed up to the kind of arrangements which placed a trade border down the middle of the Irish Sea while denying it was doing any such thing. And I think that all of these issues inherent in the protocol that we have could have been avoided had the UK government maintained a modicum of statecraft and respect for all parts of the Union by acknowledging the limitations of the mandate that they actually had from the Brexit referendum, and by remaining in as close alignment as they could with the single market and customs union, thereby minimising the economic harms that we've seen to the UK since then, and ensuring that no part of that precious union was left behind. But even yet, it seems that the government hasn't learned from its mistakes. The Scottish Government wasn't consulted by the UK Government before they took this action. And I believe I'm right in saying the UK Government didn't even afford the Scottish Government the courtesy of a phone call in advance to advise of these plans. And it's also been reported that the UK Government did not consult with their top legal advisor, the First Treasury Counsel, Sir James Eadie, on the legality of their moves. So we have a UK Government which, it seems to me, is in contempt both of international law, as we've seen in other matters in domestic law. And aspects round about the Prime Minister's current political travails are bad enough, but to stand up and use the full authority of a ministerial office to say that which is not seems to me to get right to the heart not just of the problems being presented by the protocol in its current form, but also about the fitness of the Prime Minister or anyone aspiring to replace him to hold office. I give way.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. It's clear the protocol isn't working. Northern Ireland business is suffering. May I ask the honourable gentleman, in what way does this bill act to the disadvantage of the European Union? Because it seems to me it's a very good way forward.
seems to me that whether it disadvantages or not is not something that Her Majesty's Government gets to decide. And while I'm clear there are problems with the protocol, clearly there are aspects of the protocol that are working very well indeed. Indeed, the Treasury bench has admitted it, and if the honourable member will allow me to progress, I can set out some of the examples, particularly over trade, where it is not having the impact that we are told in all aspects it is. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I come from the point of view that trust has been broken, both between the UK Government and the people of all of these islands, as well as between the UK Government and our international partners, which seems to me to get right to the nub of the issues about trying to renegotiate it. I don't think we should really need to say this, but it's absolutely vital that the UK Government should be able to respect the international obligations that it enters into freely. Lord Butler, who was head of the civil service for 10 years, has said that this country has repeatedly criticised states like Russia and China for breaking the rules-based international order, and yet now holds that it's perfectly justified itself to breach international law. And it seems we're going from a limited and specific breach to something which in this bill is potentially extensive and egregious. Even General Sir Richard Barnes, the former Chief of Joint Forces Command who served in Afghanistan, Iraq and Northern Ireland, has said that what the government is proposing is short-sighted tactics which will do much harm strategically in the wider world. In fact, what is being done is particularly stupid. And he also went on to warn that these moves will empower adversaries, as it will, quote, undermine us with our enemies by giving them the opportunity to accuse us of hypocrisy when we call them out for breaking the rules-based international order. It will also undermine us with our allies who will doubt whether they can rely on us to keep to an agreement and keep to our word.
Will you give way?
Yes.
I'm very grateful to him for giving way. Listen to what he says with a great deal of interest. He's right to defend international law and international treaties. Did he raise the concerns he's just expressed when the European Union was busy breaking those treaties, for example, over subsidies to Airbus?
What about Tariq?
Well, the honourable member for Edinburgh South West says it eloquently in one word, what aboutery. But I think we've been taken here by 40 years of political dysfunction in the party opposite and the various neuroses it's had over Europe. The exceptionalists of the punch above our weight brigade to be found extensively but not exclusively within a European research group where research seems to be at a premium, which has led us to this point. And in the process, I have to say, shredding any reputation that the UK government might have preserved for either good, stable government or adherence to international norms. Because whatever the bluff and bluster and personal agendas that might be at play here, and I notice that the Foreign Secretary is no longer in our place, it is, of course, the UK's exit from the EU rather than the protocol which created this difficult situation. Because there were only ever 3 options which would allow this particular circle to be squared. That was either a return to a border on the island of Ireland, close alignment between the EU and UK regulatory standards to reduce the needs for checks, or for checks to be carried out at the main Northern Ireland ports. And of course, the further that there's a diversion from the single market and the customs union, the harder that border then eventually becomes.
I just wanted to ask the honourable gentleman if he was aware that De Valera himself in 1937 actually tore up the Anglo-Irish Treaty in exactly the same kind of way as he's accusing other people.
You're not responsible for De Valera.
The honourable gentleman seems to be confusing me with a representative of the government of Ireland. I mean, it's an interesting historical diversion, which I'd be more than happy to discuss with him later, but I'm not exactly certain how germane it is to this particular discussion that's here. It seems a little bit recondite, to say the least of it. Anyway, moving on, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government has presented a précis of the legal advice, and the Law Society of Scotland has identified a number of provisions in this bill which it believes to be inconsistent with the UK's international law obligations. Now, because of time as it is, and we're only in the second reading, I don't intend to go into these points in any great depth or delve unnecessarily into the horrors of the empowerment of ministers that this bill would represent through the Henry VIII powers. But I would just highlight specifically in terms of Article 4 of the withdrawal agreement, which the issues which this bill creates, given that Article 4 states expressly that the UK cannot legislate contrary to its commitments through primary legislation. So we get to the point of necessity, which is ultimately the justification that the government is using here. And as I understand it, that rests on two key points. That there is, firstly, effectively, when viewed from London, no detriment to the single market from these proposals. And secondly, that it underwrites the government's wishes to protect the UK single market and also the Good Friday Agreement. Now, that was an argument that I think was neatly eviscerated by my honourable friend from Edinburgh South West in an earlier intervention. But there are 3 points, Madam Deputy Speaker, that instantly leap out to me from that. That firstly, as I've said, whether or not there is detriment is largely a subjective measure, and that whatever unilateral assertions might be made on this, whether or not there is detriment, is something that requires to be determined in another manner. Secondly, invoking an invocation of necessity, it must also not seriously impair an essential interest of another party. And I think it's quite hard to argue that this isn't something that could at least be at risk of happening. But thirdly, it doesn't seem to me to be particularly credible now to cite the protocol as harming the single market or the Good Friday Agreement, when it was cited by HM Government as a means of protecting both of those things. The Prime Minister wanting to override a deal that he himself was happy to claim credit for having got Brexit done during his 2019 election campaign really doesn't seem to me to be the strongest basis for sustaining that argument. Now, in terms of the economic effect, Northern Ireland has clearly lagged behind the rest of the UK in economic performance in recent decades relative to the UK. Yet somehow, for some reason, it's currently outpacing every other part of the UK, except perhaps predictably for London. And there must be some reason why that might be. Perhaps, I don't know if anyone can help me with why that might be. But perhaps there's a clue.
It may, if he were to examine the economic performance of Northern Ireland, he might find that, surprisingly, it's the service sector which has increased 7 times more than the manufacturing sector, and of course the service sector isn't covered by the protocol at all.
Well, manufacturing also seems to be doing quite well, as I recall, and perhaps having a foot in both markets and the easier access to both, in contrast to counterparts on the other side of the North Channel, might also be a reason for that. But a survey by the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce shows that 70% of businesses now believe that unique trading position with preferential access to both EU and UK single markets presents opportunities for Northern Ireland. The businesses reporting a significant problem has dropped from 15% to 8%. Now, while I wouldn't seek to diminish in any way the problems that 8% feel, it's perhaps an indication that many of the problems, at least initially, were because of the short lead-in time that was given and the lack of preparation and clarity ahead of the big changes which came in January 2021. So to come back to my fundamental point on this, we need a protocol. The nature of Brexit means there needs to be a protocol. It doesn't need to be exactly the same as this version, but what we absolutely don't need in the middle of a cost of living crisis is the prospect of increased trade frictions through needless conflict and a developing trade war with our largest overseas and closest market. And that, Madam Deputy Speaker, is what I very much fear this legislation, if enacted and utilised, would do. So, I believe that the way forward is through negotiations. Now, like the man asked to give directions, I wouldn't be starting from this point for a variety of reasons that I needn't detain the House on. But we need negotiations which are based on trust, which are based in good faith, which are based on cooperation. And I think the UK government would stand a much, much better chance of success if it were driven by this, instead of this piece of legislative brinkmanship. And also, if it were to pursue measures for once which were motivated by a genuine desire to deliver the best possible outcomes out of this mess for all peoples in these islands, rather than simply pandering to the agendas of those in the tiny subset of the population that might have an influence over who the next leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party might happen to be. A party, Madam Deputy Speaker, which no longer seems to be very, very certain what it's here to conserve or to unify.
Mrs. Theresa May.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to speak in the debate on this bill. Although I have to say to the lone minister sitting on the front bench that I do not welcome this bill. I fully understand and indeed share the government's desire to uphold the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. I understand and share the desire to keep the Union of the United Kingdom. I recognise the frustration and difficulty when the Northern Ireland Assembly and Executive are not in place and operating. And I also share the government's desire to get that Assembly and Executive back operating for the good of the people of Northern Ireland. But I do not believe that this bill is the way to achieve those aims. It is in thinking about this bill, I actually started off by asking myself 3 questions. First of all, do I consider this to be legal under international law? Second, will it achieve its aims? And third, does it at least maintain the standing of the United Kingdom in the eyes of the world? And my answer to all 3 of those questions is no. And that is even before we look at the extraordinarily sweeping powers that this bill would give to ministers. Now, the government's claim of legality, as we have heard, is based on the doctrine of necessity in international law. The government, as the Foreign Secretary said, has indeed published a legal position. And that describes this term necessity in the following way. The term necessity is used in international law to lawfully justify situations where the only way a state can safeguard an essential interest is the non-performance of another international obligation. The action taken may not seriously impair the essential interests of the other state and cannot be claimed where excluded by the relevant obligation, or where the state invoking it has contributed to the situation of necessity. So let's examine this. First of all, it is claimed that it is the only way. If the necessity argument is to hold, this must be the only way to achieve the government's desires. Yet the government's legal position paper itself accepts there are other ways. For example, it says the government's preference remains a negotiated outcome, which indeed was reiterated by the Foreign Secretary in her opening speech in this debate. It also acknowledges that there's another potential way to deal with this issue in the existence of Article 16. So the government's preferred option is negotiation, and then there's a second option, which is Article 16. Now, Article 16 is referred to in the legal position paper, but when I read it, I thought it was referred to in a way which seemed to try to say that the existence of Article 16 somehow justifies the introduction of this bill. Article 16 does not justify this bill. The very existence of Article 16 negates the legal justification for this bill. So let's also examine some of the other arguments for invoking the necessity defence. That defence cannot be claimed where the state invoking it has contributed to the situation of necessity. And again, in their legal position paper, the government sets out its argument that the peril that has emerged was not inherent in the protocol's provisions. I have to say to the Minister that I find that a most extraordinary statement. The peril is a direct result of the border down the Irish Sea, which was an integral and inherent part of the protocol which the government signed in the withdrawal agreement. Now, it is possible, of course, that the government might say, oh, well, we knew about that, but we didn't think the DUP would react in the way that they have. Well, I say to the Minister, they should have listened to the DUP in the many debates that went on the withdrawal agreement, because they made their position on the protocol very clear at that point, and it was not positive. So, finally, necessity suggests urgency. Imminent peril is the other phrase, the phrase that is used. There is nothing urgent about this bill. It has not been introduced as emergency legislation. It's likely to take not weeks but months to get through Parliament. And as the former Treasury Solicitor Sir Jonathan Jones said in the House magazine, if the UK really did face imminent peril, you might think the government would need to deal with it more quickly than that. So my answer to all those, the question is whether it is legal under international law, is for all the above reasons, no, it is not. So question 2, will it achieve its aims? Now, I'm assuming that the aims are either to encourage the DUP into the Northern Ireland Executive, or it's a negotiating tool to bring the EU back round to the table. On the first of these, so far I have seen no absolute commitment from the DUP that the Executive will be up and running as a result of this bill. There were rumours at one stage that at second reading that might happen. Well, as far as I can see, it has not happened. I have to say, to the Minister that if my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, wants to have a discussion with me about negotiations with other parties in this House on various matters, I'm very happy to do so. But if the bill is a negotiating tool, will it actually bring the EU back round the table? Well, so far we've seen no sign of that. And can I just say that actually my experience was that the EU looked very carefully at the political situation in any country. As I discovered after I had faced a no-confidence vote, despite having won that no-confidence vote, they then start to ask themselves, well, is it really worth negotiating with these people in government? Because will they actually be there in any period of time, regardless of the justification or not for them taking that view? But also, actually, I suspect they are saying to themselves, why should they negotiate in detail with a government that shows itself willing to sign an agreement, claim it as a victory, and then try to tear part of it up in less than 3 years' time? So my answer to the second question as to whether this bill will achieve its aims is that no, it will not. My final question is about the UK's standing in the world. The UK's standing in the world, our ability to convene and encourage others in the defence of our shared values, depends on the respect others have for us as a country that keeps its word and displays those shared values in its actions. As a patriot, I would not want to do anything that would diminish this country in the eyes of the world. I have to say to the government, this bill is not, in my view, legal in international law. It will not achieve its aims, and it will diminish the standing of the United Kingdom in the eyes of the world, and I cannot support it.
I'm very grateful to the backbench speakers so far who have been very considerate of others in the length of their speeches. But I will, after the next speaker, have to introduce an 8-minute time limit in order to be able to give everybody equal access. Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the opportunity to speak at second reading of this very important bill. And at the outset, I think it would be important to make the point to all right honourable and honourable members that this is not simply another Brexit-related bill, nor indeed is it a technical bill to remedy problems that have arisen since January 2021, albeit that it will have that effect. Fundamentally, the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill seeks to finally and fundamentally reset and restore Northern Ireland's relationship with the rest of the United Kingdom, given the devastating impact of the Protocol on the economic, constitutional, social and political life of Northern Ireland over the last 18 months. Many in this House will remember our opposition to the Protocol, and it's an honour to follow the former Prime Minister, and she quite rightly flagged up our opposition from the outset to this Protocol. And it gives me no pleasure to say that we warned that it would be bad for Northern Ireland and it would not work. And that assessment has been more than borne out in reality. The Northern Ireland institutions were restored in January 2020, and the former Secretary of State is in his place. And he was very much involved in bringing about the New Decade, New Approach agreement. But at the heart of that agreement was a clear commitment by the UK government to protect Northern Ireland's place within the UK internal market, and that it would be respected. And on that basis, my party re-entered power sharing, and we kept our side of the bargain. And we were patient, and we waited for the government to take the action to protect our place in the internal market. And the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland did refer to measures that were introduced in the Internal Markets Bill that would at least have partly dealt with this problem, alongside other measures that were proposed in the Finance Bill. But those measures were not brought forward. And still we waited. And back last July, when I became leader of my party, I warned then that if the government failed to honour its commitment in New Decade, New Approach, then we would have a real difficulty, because the consensus that is essential to ensure that power sharing is maintained in Northern Ireland is being undermined. I will give way to the Chairman of the Select Committee.
To the right honourable gentleman, he hasn't said anything up to now which is in any way factually challengeable. But could I ask him, on the presumption that the bill this evening secures its second reading and begins its parliamentary progress, in the interest of serving those people in Northern Ireland who look to the Executive and to Stormont to meet their daily needs, will he instruct his party colleagues, who are MLAs, to return to the Executive, get it back up and running, discharge their democratic duty and serve all the communities of Northern Ireland?
I thank the honourable member, and I am going to come to that point in my question, but I would simply respond to him by saying, if I were to do that, would the honourable member then support the bill? And I heard nothing in his speech, in his contribution to the House, that suggested he would. Back last July, I made it clear that the Irish Sea border is not just a threat to the economic integrity of the United Kingdom, but it is also a threat to the living standards of the people of Northern Ireland. And so it has been proven, because the impact of the additional costs in bringing goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland is contributing towards the cost of living situation in Northern Ireland. It is driving up the cost of food in our supermarkets, it's driving up the cost of manufacturing, and is making it difficult for businesses to operate effectively.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And further to that point, it seems to me that the people of Northern Ireland aren't sometimes able to get the goods from the United Kingdom, because manufacturers here aren't sending them to Northern Ireland because of the additional burden of trying to get them there.
Well, the honourable member is absolutely right about that, and many of my constituents and those of my right honourable and honourable friends have experienced that, both as consumers and as businesses. This is not just about businesses, it's about every citizen of Northern Ireland. And it is, Madam Deputy Speaker, also about the democratic deficit that my members who are elected to the Northern Ireland Assembly and who are ministers in that Assembly and Executive are expected to preside over the imposition of regulations over which they have no say. No democratic input into how those regulations are put in place, and they regulate how we trade with the rest of our own country. How can anyone in this House defend a situation where part of this United Kingdom is treated in a way where its elected representatives have no say in many of the laws that regulate our trade with the rest of the United Kingdom? That is simply unacceptable, and that is part of the problem here.
Given way, and I agree with him, and I've said that in this place many times about aspects of the Joint Committee. But this bill that he is agreeing to today similarly gives absolutely no power to anybody in Northern Ireland, himself, his parties, or anybody else. It gives all the power to the Secretary of State. So on that basis, how can he support that?
Well, I would say to the honourable lady that this bill, if enacted, will restore confidence in Northern Ireland, will restore the consensus that is essential to operate power sharing, and therefore it will give back to the elected representatives in Northern Ireland the power to take the decisions that they have not been able to take. And I also have to say to this House, it's a bit rich sometimes when I hear honourable members arguing for devolution and for the restoration of power, when this House on a number of occasions recently has overridden devolution, overridden the Northern Ireland Assembly, and enacted powers which were contrary to the desires of the elected representatives in Northern Ireland. Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe this bill is essential to the restoration of political stability in Northern Ireland. It will provide a framework for the free movement of goods within the UK internal market, in line with the Government's commitment in New Decade, New Approach. The bill gives reasonable protection to the EU single market. It doesn't impact on the EU and the integrity of the EU single market. It protects the integrity of our market, of their market. But what it also does, Madam Deputy Speaker, is protect the integrity of the United Kingdom's internal market. And I see no reason why this House should not bring forward measures to do so, when it is clear and evident that the protocol has disrupted the integrity of the UK internal market.
I'm very grateful
And I know that the Right Honourable Gentleman gives a lot of thought to these issues and doesn't arrive at opinions lightly. He's arguing that the bill, as it stands at the moment, will give Northern Ireland the things it wants. I think that's basically the main point of his argument. What if he's wrong? What will happen then?
Well, I would say to the honourable member, I'm not suggesting the bill is perfect. It is rare that legislation that passes this House is perfect in every sense and doesn't subsequently require amendment. The benefit of this bill is that it empowers ministers to make change where change is necessary to ensure the proper functioning of the UK internal market. And I think that is an entirely valid thing for this Parliament and Government to do. But furthermore, as a unionist, I make no apology for saying to this House that the bill will restore Northern Ireland's place within the Union. And that is important to me. Some right honourable and honourable members have referred to the rule of law, and yet the High Court and the Court of Appeal in Belfast has stated very clearly that the protocol subjugates Article 6 of the Act of Union. The Act of Union is an international agreement. The Act of Union is the very fundamental building block of the Union. And Article 6 of the Acts of Union states very clearly that I, as a Northern Ireland citizen, as a member of this United Kingdom, have the right to trade freely within my own country, that there should be no barriers to trade between the constituent parts of the United Kingdom. And yet what the protocol has done in putting in place the Irish Sea border is it has broken Article 6. It has made me a second-class citizen in my own country because I don't have the right to trade freely with the rest of the United Kingdom. And I'm simply asking for my rights as a British citizen. Well, the honourable member, the chair of the Select Committee, shakes his head. But I have to say to him, if he found his constituents in a position where they were not able to trade freely with the rest of their own country, I think he might be as annoyed as I am about that situation. And he might actually have something to say about it.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. One of the obviously he's putting forward a very excellent case and how to do away with the Northern Ireland Protocol through this legislation. Does he also agree that within the European Court of Justice that removes the direct jurisdiction of the Court of Justice of the European Union back to here, and it should be the people of this House, the people of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, who make them decisions and not Europe?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe in fairness, and I believe that when there is a dispute at an international level, it should not be left to the court of one side to be the arbiter in that situation, and that needs to be rectified. And in respect of the implications of this bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me make it clear that in my view, in our view, the bill will provide for the restoration of the equilibrium that is essential in Northern Ireland, the cross-community consensus that is at the heart of the Belfast Agreement and that is absolutely necessary to ensure the proper functioning of the political institutions. And it is evident in the elections in May, just last month, not a single unionist member elected to the Assembly supports the Northern Ireland Protocol. Therefore, there is not a cross-community consensus in favour of this protocol. Now, this House can bury its head in the sand. It can pretend that there isn't an instant solution to this problem. Or it can say, well, look, let's just wait for the EU to finally agree to change its negotiating mandate. But what about in Northern Ireland in the meantime? I want to see those political institutions restored, but I'm not able to do it if my ministers are required to impose a protocol that harms Northern Ireland. I'm not prepared, my party is not prepared to engage in an act of self-harm to this part, Northern Ireland's part, of the United Kingdom. We're simply not prepared to do that. And therefore, is it the will of this House that it wishes to see Northern Ireland languishing without political institutions able to operate because there is no cross-community consensus, while we argue the rights and wrongs and the legalities of this situation? I don't have, unfortunately, that situation. I don't have, for my people, a situation where we can talk all night and debate about this bill and its legality in international law. I happen to believe there is a necessity, and the necessity is peace and stability in Northern Ireland. And this House is charged, this government is charged with responsibility of ensuring peace and stability in Northern Ireland. Therefore, there is a necessity. And I do not see, and I have not heard from anyone else in this House opposing the bill, what their solution is. Beyond, let's have more negotiations with an EU that refuses to change its negotiating mandate, that will not change the text of the protocol. And I have to say to right honourable and honourable members, that refusal to change the text of the protocol simply means that we won't get a solution that will achieve the cross-community consensus required in Northern Ireland. And I believe the bill offers a solution.
Does the right honourable gentleman accept, as he said earlier, that there is a serious democratic deficit which exists at the moment in the making of laws which are made by European institutions in the Council of Ministers by majority vote, behind closed doors, where none of his voters have an opportunity to intervene whatsoever, and at the same time in a manner which is completely inconsistent with proper democratic procedures? Isn't that absolutely right, in reply to the honourable member for North Dorset?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the honourable member for Stonen for the excellent work that he has been doing in helping to bring about the progress that we're making towards the restoration of the political institutions in Northern Ireland. As I come to a conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me say this. Much of what will happen in the coming period in Northern Ireland will be shaped by the attitudes and decisions in this House. If this bill convincingly passes all of its common stages in its current form, and if the Government continues to develop the regulations required to bring to an end the harmful implementation of the protocol, then that would, of course, give substantially greater confidence that new arrangements are on the way, which in turn would provide a basis to take further steps to see the return of our local institutions. And therefore I would appeal to members of this House who genuinely want to see the institutions restored, up and running in Northern Ireland again, to prioritise the interests of Northern Ireland over any narrower ideological reservations that they may have about this bill. I urge them to recognise the vitality of this bill, now progressing rapidly through its legislative stages in the Commons before the summer recess, and ensuring that not only does this bill receive substantial support in this House, but it is not subject to either wrecking amendments or indeed other amendments that would dilute the framework and impact of the bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, much harm has been inflicted on the Belfast Agreement and its successor agreements. Time is now short to ensure that we arrest this situation, and the only way to do that finally and fully is to deal with the protocol and to see Northern Ireland once again focus on moving forward together. We want to see the Northern Ireland Assembly and Executive restored, and that can be achieved where there is a sustainable basis for doing so. We will continue to be condition and not calendar-led as we look forward to this bill now making rapid progress. I commend this bill, and we will be supporting it in the interests of Northern Ireland and the integrity of the entire United Kingdom.
Ian Smith.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to speak after my right honourable friend for Lagan Valley. And there are powerful and legitimate arguments being made regarding the legal basis of this bill, and I'm sympathetic to them. Whatever the motivations and goal of this bill, and whatever the reasons we're at this point, it's important to look at what is practical and most likely to succeed regarding the NI Protocol, and what will ensure we show to the people of Northern Ireland that we're handling this issue with balance and an even hand. There are real and significant issues that we've just heard with the Protocol: customs checks, east-west, and regulatory challenges, to name but two. Whilst I don't accept that the Protocol is a constitutional threat to the UK, it is clear that there are many complex challenges created by it. In acknowledging these issues, however, there's a significant support for the Northern Ireland Protocol. Business organisations across Northern Ireland have been engaging in good faith with government for over 2 years, looking at a myriad of ways to improve the deal. Their view is that the need for stability and balance can only be achieved through a negotiated settlement, and that they want to preserve the opportunities of the Protocol. They also want to protect the strong position of the Northern Ireland economy, which has now been shown in multiple reports to be performing amongst the best in the country. There are major concerns that the advantages as well as the disadvantages of the protocol could be lost with this bill, that the Henry VIII clauses are there to remove almost all of the protocol, should ministers want to. A majority of MLAs also articulated this view in a recent letter to the government. They accepted that changes do need to be made, but they are clear that they want a negotiated approach. Voters across Northern Ireland, many of who support the need for change also, additionally want a negotiated solution. 74% of voters support a UK-EU negotiated solution. Mr Deputy Speaker, I fear that this bill is a kind of displacement activity from the core task of doing whatever we can to negotiate a better protocol deal for Northern Ireland. I also fear that it risks creating an impression to unionism that a black and white solution is available, when the reality is once this bill has been dragged through the Lords and courts and EU responses and reprisals, compromise will ultimately be needed. Our sole focus should be on how we shift the EU into a negotiation to get the changes needed for Northern Ireland and for my right honourable friend's party. We risk toxifying further the discussions we are having with the EU and Member States, and we risk prolonging instability for Northern Ireland business, not to mention putting the whole of the UK at risk of trade and tariff reprisals. We also risk further entrenching the view of many middle ground voters in Northern Ireland that the desire to finish Brexit by removing the protocol is against their best interests. This issue of winning hearts and minds is important to bear in mind as we seek to persuade and cajole people to stick with the Union. We should be looking at how we persuade the EU to make the changes needed by unionism. We should be looking at how we encourage the Northern Ireland parties to work together on joint priorities, and the EU on understanding that it is in their interest to provide much greater political focus on this issue. What else can we do in other parts of the UK-EU relationship to encourage the bloc to shift? Our challenge is to push the EU to move beyond the flexibilities they are proposing and to change the text. But we also need to be realistic about how changes will be made. It'll be more suspensions, more grace periods, turning the eye, compromises seem more likely than wholesale rewriting. Northern Ireland is very used to these types of deals, shades of grey rather than black and white. And we know that patient, quiet work can deliver. We've already seen this happen on medicines. The EU have now changed the protocol and the government have secured uninterrupted supplies to Northern Ireland. Not only that, NI's crucial pharma sector has access to both markets. There is no reason that the medicines deal cannot be replicated across agri-food and customs if the political will is there on both sides. But to do this, we need the highest level focus, leader to leader. A political negotiation focused on Northern Ireland, challenging the approach the EU took over the May years. The announcement yesterday on more joint working with France in other areas could lead to a space to push forward for the changes needed on Northern Ireland with a crucial member state. But it is worth bearing in mind that in the readout of the Macron-Johnson call, the Northern Ireland Protocol was not raised yesterday. It wasn't raised. We also need to work out how to encourage Dublin. We need their help to get the EU to shift. Ireland should have done more to help when we needed an exit mechanism on the backstop. But we now need to get Dublin and also the parties in Northern Ireland to focus on a resolution. We need a new, intensive UK, Northern Ireland, Irish and EU process. That is how we will get the East-West checks resolved, so there's no border down the Irish Sea. That is how we will fudge issues on regulation. That is even how we might get and fix legal oversight. But we need a sustainable solution. The task in Northern Ireland is, as ever, to secure a broad consensus, and that means that government, as well as addressing the concerns of unionism, also has to reflect on the concerns of all communities and the growing centre ground. A new, intensive Northern Ireland-focused negotiation process is the only way to ensure that this fragile but high-performing part of our country is handled with the utmost care, balance and respect.
Order. Just to remind everybody that if you weren't in at the very beginning, and you know who you are, and even more importantly, I know who you are, do not stand because you will not get in. And secondly, everybody participating, please do come for the wind-ups. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Well, this bill is proof, if ever it were needed, that Brexit is not done. It was always going to be difficult to reconcile leaving the EU with the challenge of an open border, and so it's proved. And let's be absolutely frank from the start, our relationship with the European Union is now in a very, very bad place. Now, perhaps that has something to do with the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip, because before he became Prime Minister, he promised he would never, ever, ever put a border in the Irish Sea. When he became Prime Minister, he promptly did that. He described the protocol, when he negotiated, as in perfect conformity with the Good Friday Agreement. He then said there will be no checks on goods going from GB to Northern Ireland. Now, this was not true, and it's probably one of many reasons why so many people don't trust the Prime Minister, including many EU leaders. Now, what can we conclude from that process? Despite the fact that the impact assessment made it very clear that there would be checks, what would happen, the government either didn't fully understand the protocol they had negotiated, or they thought it wouldn't be a problem, or they missold it, or they always intended to result from it later on. And whatever the explanation is, it doesn't reflect terribly well on ministers. But having made that point, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are where we are, and we have a problem. And the problem is that the Northern Ireland Assembly and the Executive are not functioning, and all of us should be worried about that. And I should have said at the beginning, it was a great pleasure to follow the Right Honourable Gentleman, because I think he spoke extremely wisely. Now, as the member for Maidenhead, Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead, pointed out, I suppose in the government's eyes the test of the bill is, will it work to bring the institutions back up and running them? None of us knows for sure the answer to that, but in the meantime the Foreign Secretary is taking a very big gamble, and in the process, in my view, she is trashing Britain's international reputation as a country that can be trusted to keep its word. Now, I don't propose to dwell at all, really, on the detail of the bill. Others have done that very effectively, but it's just not the way to solve the problem, and I oppose it because it will lead to a prolonged standoff with the European Union. It will prolong the problems that the Right Honourable Gentleman who speaks for the DUP has just referred to. It will worsen relations, and if everything goes horribly wrong, it could end up in a trade war with the European Union at a very difficult time for us economically, and when we have a real war on our hands between Russia and Ukraine. So we have to find another way of resolving this, and that does require the UK and the EU to sit down and negotiate. And I've heard all the arguments from both sides. It's the other lot who are not doing the talking, and we're willing, and so on and so forth. And they can carry on blaming each other till the cows come home. But as long as they do that, they will be failing to fulfil, both sides, their political responsibility to find a political solution to what is a political problem. And at the heart of this is, how do you protect the integrity of the single market while not interfering unreasonably with goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland? And that's why the protocol refers to goods at risk. This is the key phrase we have to bear in mind. I think there's some pretty easy places to start, and if you do take supermarket deliveries travelling from Cairnryan to Larne to shops that are only in Northern Ireland, what exactly is the risk of those goods undermining the integrity of the single market? And as far as I can see, there is none. Therefore, why should they require an export health certificate? In the 18 months that the grace periods have been extended, can anyone point to a single example of the integrity of the single market having been undermined? Because I am not aware of one. I genuinely cannot fathom why the EU is so insistent on requiring a customs code to be provided by supermarkets and others, because what are they going to do with the statistics? Are they actually going to publish stats on the movement of baked beans and baby food between GB and Northern Ireland? And we were aware of the other problems, seed potatoes, organic products, divergence on certain ingredients. Now, in making that point, I'm not going to, because I do want to keep to time. Of course, there are products where it can reasonably be argued there is a potential risk. I wish we'd spend the time talking about those products, one by one, because if there's a good case, I'm sure that the government will respond. And while the EU says it's offered to reduce paperwork, the thing to remember is it's a reduction compared to the full application of the rules. It is an increase compared to what is currently the case because of the extension of the grace periods. And that's why I've said to the EU and all those I've spoken to, the EU needs to move to make this negotiation work. And surely we can reach some agreement on SPS checks on the basis that almost all the food produced in Britain is produced to exactly the same standards that it was while we were members of the European Union. So, in conclusion, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I find this very frustrating because you hear Simon Coveney on the radio when it's put to him the idea of a green lane. He said, well, we proposed something very similar. Well, why can't the two parties get on with a negotiation to make this happen? I mean, heaven forbid, if you can negotiate the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, this astonishing achievement, and it's the phrase of my good friend, the Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, who said earlier today, if you can do that, is the government really incapable, with the EU, of negotiating for a prawn sandwich to cross the Irish Sea without a lot of accompanying paperwork? This cannot be beyond the wit and ability of politicians. So, in my view, Mr. Speaker, this is a bill born of desperation rather than principle. It's a bill trying to solve a problem that is entirely of the government's own making. It's a bill that does Britain's international standing no good whatsoever. And it's a bill that will make the negotiation, that is the only way this is going to be solved in the end, harder rather than easier, because there are so many more pressing things for us to be talking to the EU, our biggest, nearest and most important trading partners, still about, not least the war in Ukraine, not least climate change. And the current crisis in the government in respect of Northern Ireland arises from a practical problem, and it requires a practical solution. We need those old virtues of patient diplomacy and negotiation, which takes as its starting points the purpose of the rules to protect the integrity of the single market, rather than the rules themselves. And frankly, it's now time for the government, together with the EU, to get back round the table and sort this out.
And Duncan Smith.
Grateful to Deputy Speaker for calling me so early. Can I just start by saying to the right honourable gentleman, I agree with all this stuff about the trade issues. These have been on the table for ages, and I will just give them one small point about, I think, during the breakdown in my previous right honourable friend's negotiations when she was Prime Minister, I happened to take a delegation, including Lord Trimble, to see the then chief negotiator. And actually I put to him the very fact that the whole issue around trade across the border was easily settled as long as we were able to trust each other on things like phytosanitary foods and veterinary checks, which they do with New Zealand. He completely agreed, and he said it would be at all possible, but then it came to another agreement, and we plunged ever since. It is wholly feasible not to have these ludicrous checks and not to have these ludicrous requirements for the customs codes to be banged across to the EU, or for the Court of Justice to have to sit ruling over what was going on in Northern Ireland, because it would have been agreed then, and a thing called mutual enforcement, where both sides take complete responsibility for the enforcement of transgressions in the other one's area when it comes from Northern Ireland. And that would have solved that problem straight. Here's the problem. The EU has point-blank refused to negotiate that. Now, here's the point about this, the protocol. I'm not for saying the protocol should go completely. I'm actually saying it should be changed. That's the whole point. When I looked at it and read it before we originally voted on it, I read very clearly what its main purpose was. Article 1, paragraph 1 and 3 make it very clear that the primacy in all of this is the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. Upholding that is critical. Of course it's critical. I served in Northern Ireland. I never want anybody that I know to go back to a thing like that again. I lost people in Northern Ireland. It is part of me as much as it is for those who live in Northern Ireland. So we don't want to go back there. And the Good Friday Agreement, therefore, must be primary. And it's, by the way, an international agreement. So here we have a problem. We're talking about breaking international agreements, but we have a clash between international agreements as to which one is prime. And Article 1, paragraph 3 makes it very clear that the Good Friday, maintenance of that balance in the Good Friday Belfast Agreement is prime. So if that is the case, I don't believe, I'm not a lawyer, I accept that, badge of pride for me, I have to tell you, but I say, my right honourable friend, I'm sure there are others who would argue differently. But I say quite, of course, I always hear him argue and I love it. I must just say to him, absolute agreement, which is why I do not, and I think I've read the text of this, I don't think and believe this legitimately would break international law. And there's a good reason. If the Good Friday Belfast Agreement is so prime in the protocol, it was agreed from the word go that what affects that badly will actually make this thing fall. Then in the rest of the protocol, it's very important because the protocol was not seen, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as permanent. It never was. First of all, it was negotiated under Article 50, which meant that it cannot be permanent of its own right. One second. And the second thing is, inside the protocol, Articles 13.8 makes it very clear that it can all be changed in whole or in part. So what's the problem? It's not working. Change it. And it could have been changed ages ago. In fact, I did originally, back last year, ask for Article 16 to be triggered simply so we could start that process immediately. So the point I want to make here is that the Good Friday Belfast Agreement is critical. And so it was about safeguarding that first, and then there was no hard border, EU single market, and the UK's territorial integrity. Well, the last one, the EU's territorial integrity, has clearly been badly damaged in this, and we cannot have that reign any much further. It's quite clear that Northern Ireland is an important part of the United Kingdom and therefore must be treated as an important part of the United Kingdom as much as my constituency is, so should their constituents be as well. Right. So this is critical, and actually even in the protocol it specifies that that is one of the priorities. And so here we go again. Why would the EU not change the mandate? They set a narrow mandate which said they would only deal with issues that affected the running of the protocol. They did not allow their negotiator to have a mandate that would take and change 13.8 in whole or in part the protocol. So we are here today with this because we are only going to be able to force this to happen through this legislation. For those who say negotiate, 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 negotiation is not an end in itself. It's got a purpose, which is at some point you have to leave the room because it no longer works, and until the other side makes a change, you can't simply go back. And I think this is the real problem that we face. The only time the EU will sit up and look at this is when they realise that the British government is determined to make this change come hell or high water. If the EU won't agree to the necessity for this, then we will have to make it. And it is reluctantly done by the government, I believe, reluctantly done. And I've listened carefully to what my right honourable and learned friend, the ex-Justice Secretary, has said about the efficacy of this in international law, and I know he will speak shortly and we'll want to hear what he has to say. But I have to say, quite simply, that the most important thing here is that the EU, and including Ireland, I might say, wakes up to what the challenge of this really is. This process of the border was weaponised during the course of the negotiations, wrongly and I think damagingly. And the reason why we ended up getting locked down in these original negotiations and ending in this position is because it was seen as a stick to beat the dog. The dog was Brexit Britain, and they were going to use it no matter what to make sure that it couldn't be clean. Well, it's time to recognise that has to stop. And so I support this bill tonight, not on technicalities, but on the reality that it has turned out well, I will give way to him, yes.
I'm quite surprised to see the honourable gentleman want to interfere further in Brexit, because is he not the honourable gentleman that told this House that this matter was debated and thrashed to death in October 2019? If there was anything else that needed debating about it, he'd love to know what it was. Well, when was the epiphany?
Protocol, that's why. I don't know if he did. I read the protocol. In it is clear that the protocol, if it does not work, will be changed in whole or in part. He should have read it. He would have understood why. You can't change it. That was the point. You can change it. That was the whole point about the protocol. So the protocol itself was always clear. It had the seeds of its own major change in it. I make no resolution on it. I absolutely was right to do so, and I would repeat that again. So whether or not he wants to hear what I have to say is another matter altogether. No, he's already intervened. He had his moment in the sun, and he lost it, so I'm going to move on. So the reality here is, I have to say to, to my honourable and right honourable friends, we are here because of the necessity of the way that the EU has behaved, and I have to say, the Irish government. There have been some good people. The President of Irish Taoiseach, I think, has been much more reasonable about this, but the Irish Foreign Secretary has celebrated quite recently the diversion of trade that was taking place, which contravenes Article 16 and makes it very clear that it had to be changed. Again, I read the treaty, which I don't think he did. So the point really is that I would say to my honourable and right honourable friends, we are here because we have to be here. I do not believe it breaks international law. It's a clash of international treaties. The most important international treaty is the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. The maintenance of that is critical. I want to see the DUP back in power sharing. I hope, as I understood the right honourable gentleman say, that he would head in that direction and go back into power sharing once this is through. The Commons, I'll hold him to that, I hope. And I want to say to my honourable friends, let's get this done as quickly as possible, because only then will the EU realise that we mean business.
Hear, hear. Claire Hanna.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. These have been a frustrating and damaging few years for Northern Ireland, and this bill adds to us. It's been bad for the economy, for businesses who need stability and not brinkmanship, and it's been bad for relationships in each of the agreement's three strands within Northern Ireland, North and South of Ireland, and between East and West. And more than that, this bill is being seen as part of the government's departure from the values of the Good Friday Agreement, from compromise, from partnership and from the rule of law. It's recycling the same distortions and half-truths that the people of Northern Ireland have been listening to for the last 6 or 7 years of the Brexit debate, and there is still a failure to reconcile the dilemmas that Brexit forces, the choices that the UK government have made with the reality of our geography, and there have been some truly mind-bending arguments put forth to justify this bill, that this bill is about consent and consensus, when in fact the majority of people in Northern Ireland have not consented to Brexit in any form, and while a majority of voters and MLAs reject this bill in the strongest possible terms, that it's about protecting the Good Friday Agreement, while the government across are in the middle of body slamming a cornerstone of that Good Friday Agreement, and by people who we all saw scuttling away from castle buildings when the Good Friday Agreement was being forged, and people we all saw screaming in the windows in the first few years while we tried to implement that agreement. We've heard tonight that it's about rights. Well, the women of Northern Ireland and the LGBT community of Northern Ireland and the minority ethnic community of Northern Ireland would like a word if it's truly about rights. We've heard that it's about the alleged damage to our economy, when every credible business organisation in Northern Ireland is calling for the retention of the protocol, when business after business is lauding the potential of dual market access, when Northern Ireland is the only region outside of London in the UK that is managing to achieve post-pandemic GDP growth. We're told that it's about a democratic deficit, and that's protested by removing the entirety of government from the people of Northern Ireland, and that's going to be solved by handing over Henry VIII powers that will allow the government to ride roughshod over everybody in Northern Ireland. I'm old enough to remember when Brexit was supposed to be about parliamentary sovereignty. We've been promised that and promised sunlit uplands, but with the distortions people in Northern Ireland have experienced, we are getting gaslit uplands in Northern Ireland. There has been a cynical campaign for years to distort the causes and effects of the protocol. I can understand entirely the hurt and the frustration of many ordinary unionists. They have been catastrophically misrepresented by the DUP in particular, and by the PM, who insisted that there would be no. You said all the words for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years here, and we ended up with the protocol.
Yes.
Some of us are here to try and address the mess that was created.
You lost a third of your
mess
seats.
when you voted down every possible option that could have prevented the sea border. But unionism and others are wrong to think that the solution is breaking international law and walking away from partnership and compromise. And I hope also that they will understand, and I mean this in the best possible way, many of us, hundreds of thousands of us in Northern Ireland who don't identify as unionists, constitutionally compromise every single day. We live in a reality where the governance lines don't directly match up with our identity, and we do it because it suits the majority of people, and we do it because Northern Ireland isn't a place where hard, sharp lines of sovereignty work. It isn't a place where the winner can take all. It is a place where we survive in, as the member said, the shades of grey of governance. And I'm glad that some of the very plausible solutions, like SPS arrangements and veterinary deals, are being mentioned, because for some reason they have disappeared off the agenda. We're told, I would do anything for Northern Ireland, but I won't do that. I won't do that simple negotiated solution that could remove 70 and 80% of the checks. There's no doubt that the protocol can be smoothed and the operation can be improved. Everybody says that. Nobody, as I've said before, in Northern Ireland loves the protocol, but we know that the better options were voted down. But like everything that's worth doing in Northern Ireland, that will be achieved through partnership, through compromises, and not through unmeetable red lines that would remove the people of Northern Ireland from the single market, which was something that has no support. But instead of doing the hard work and levelling with the people of Northern Ireland, this government, to whom the DUP have shackled themselves, are choosing to distort and deflect. They're using this stab in the back narrative that this is all the fault of Remainers, of the EU, of the Irish, of those who aren't patriots. But we know it's about them, and the member previously mentioned Eamon de Valera, and it reminded me of a quote that is echoed down through Anglo-Irish relationships from the last decade. Lord Edward Carson said in the other place, who'd been the leader of unionism, as he reflected in disillusionment at the shambles that had been left by the party opposite in the island of Ireland, he said, "What a fool I was. I was only a puppet, and so was Ulster, and so was Ireland, in the political game that was to get the Conservative Party into power." Well, the only difference between then and now, and this miserable and deceitful bill, is that it is about maintaining the Conservative Party in power. It is about propping up a failing and a discredited Prime Minister. It is perhaps about the Foreign Secretary currying favour with the malevolence of the ERG, and about once again pulling the wool over unionism's eyes. Well, Mr Speaker, I suspect we can't stop this bill, as people will troop through and support it, but members and honourable members should understand that people on the island of Ireland and further afield are observing this process. They are watching to see what this government is doing, and they are having to work through the implications of dealing with a government who are in a very bad place morally, and who are in contravention of the culture of lawfulness that many of us have worked very, very hard to cultivate in Northern Ireland. And their approaches are fundamentally altering dynamics and relationships between these islands. And I don't believe, having spent the last 6 years of my life having this same argument, I don't believe the party opposite have it in them to put the people and the businesses and the economy of people of Northern Ireland first. But I would implore some of my colleagues on these benches to please unshackle yourselves, work with us, work with your neighbours and your colleagues and your friends to arrive at the solutions, the negotiated solutions that we all know are possible. We have solved bigger problems than these before. They are available. End this toxic debate. That's what the people of Northern Ireland want. They don't want to have to hear this day after day on the radio. They want dual market access. They want our economy to prosper, and that's entirely achievable with goodwill.
Order. In order to try and get everybody in as much as possible as we can, the time limit is being reduced forthwith to 6 minutes. David Jones.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The status of Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom derives initially from the Act of Union of 1800, which provides in Article 6 that in matters of trade,
and treaties with foreign powers, the subjects of Ireland shall have the same privileges as British subjects. Now, the 1800 Act was augmented, as we know, by the Belfast Good Friday Agreement of 1998, which declares that it would be wrong to make any change in the status of Northern Ireland save with the consent of a majority of its people. Now, the Belfast Agreement, as honourable members have indicated today, is fundamental to the maintenance of peace in Northern Ireland. It operates to preserve the constitutional status of Northern Ireland, and the crucial importance of the agreement is in fact acknowledged in the Northern Ireland Protocol itself, which provides that the protocol is without prejudice to the provisions of the 1998 agreement in respect of the constitutional status of Northern Ireland and the principle of consent. The essential point, therefore, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that the protocol, which is part of an international treaty, explicitly acknowledges the primacy of the Belfast Agreement, which is another international treaty. That agreement, however, has been undermined by the protocol. It's absolutely clear that the arrangements set up by the protocol are having a detrimental impact on life in Northern Ireland and on the privileges of its people. There are, as we've heard, burdensome checks on goods passing from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. They have, in fact, created a border in the Irish Sea between constituent parts of the United Kingdom, which cannot be acceptable. And as we heard from the Right Honourable Member for Lagan Valley, people in Northern Ireland are finding it difficult to secure many goods that they have traditionally been able to purchase, and there has been a diversion of trade away from mainland Great Britain and towards the European Union. And the disruption, of course, as we've heard, has impacted on the democratic institutions of Northern Ireland. The Assembly has not been reconstituted since the elections earlier this year, and the executive remains suspended. This is a worrying and potentially dangerous state of affairs, especially, of course, given the sensitive political history of Northern Ireland. Now, both the United Kingdom and the European... Yes, I'll give way.
Just given his concern for the Assembly in Northern Ireland, democracy in Northern Ireland, doesn't he think the protocol should be something that be decided by that very Assembly in Northern Ireland?
Well, they will, of course, in due course, have the right to decide that, but that will, of course, be 4 years after the passage of time. But the UK and the EU both recognise the practical problems of the protocol and its impact on Northern Ireland. And both recognise that they should, if possible, be resolved by negotiation. In fact, honourable members around the House have repeated that today. Everybody would like it to be resolved by negotiation. But for that to happen, it would be necessary for the EU to change the negotiating mandate that is given to Vice President Šefčovič. And that, of course, it refuses to do. As we've heard from the Secretary of State, there have been extensive negotiations over 18 months, and those negotiations have been fruitless. The government, therefore, has a clear duty to take action to restore the privileges of the people of Northern Ireland to a position of equality with that of the rest of the UK, and similarly to respect the primacy of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. The action that is taken is to introduce this bill, which does not, as has been suggested, tear up the protocol. On the contrary, it respects and protects both the integrity of the EU single market and the openness of its land border, both of which are quite rightly matters in respect of which the EU and the Irish Republic are concerned. There will still be checks on goods arriving in Northern Ireland, but destined for the European Union through a red lane arrangement. And the bill explicitly protects the EU single market against the movement across the Irish land border of goods on which the correct EU tariffs have not been paid or which do not comply with EU regulatory standards. It also provides explicitly that no land border infrastructure or checks or controls on the borders may be created. This, in every respect, satisfies the concerns of the European Union, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And the bill also complies with the United Kingdom's obligations under the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. It preserves the status of Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom by restoring the equality of the privileges of its people to those enjoyed by the people of the rest of the United Kingdom. So this bill is wholly necessary, Mr Deputy Speaker. Without it, the peace process established by the Belfast Agreement will be dangerously compromised. It's a crucial but proportionate bill, and it deserves the support of this House.
Thank you very much. Sir Tony Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I think anybody in this House who takes legislation seriously ought to start from the presumption that operating tactically is a dangerous process. It is short-sighted and short-term. But this, in the context of Northern Ireland, is not simply foolish. It is very, very dangerous. We know that the forces that have been unleashed in Northern Ireland in recent times by the rhetoric, an election in Northern Ireland itself only a matter of weeks ago, the rhetoric over the weeks and months from the UK government of heightened tensions in that context. And this is dangerous, and this House should take that on board. And I don't want to be alarmist about this, because, in fact, what we've got to move towards is something where we take a much more serious, much more rational view. You know, the Right Honourable Member for Chingford and a number of others made the point about Article 13.8 of the protocol. And they're right to say that there is scope for amendment under that article. However, that is by negotiation and by agreement. It's got to be done on the basis that we get back to the negotiating table. Now, we know if we put a shotgun to the heads of any of the parties in this situation, we're simply going to get a negative response. That applies, I've got to say, to the DUP, it applies to other parts of the community in Northern Ireland. We've got to take people with us. But frankly, it also applies to the bilateral relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union. If we're not involved in serious negotiation, trying to look for common sense solutions, we will fail the people of Northern Ireland. But there is a bigger risk within this, Mr Deputy Speaker. And the bigger risk is this, is that the situation can be traumatic for people across the Northern Ireland. If we enter into a really serious breakdown of relationships with the European Union, things will be dramatically worse for the people of Northern Ireland, and they will be worse for my constituents, they will be worse for the constituents of every member of this House. So we do now need rational politics. Now, my honourable friend for Leeds Central made some very sensible points. It's long been the case, and it's been obvious from the very beginning that that once we'd begun to move towards Brexit, the situation that guaranteed the respect for the Good Friday Agreement could only be done in one way. It couldn't be done by having a hard border across the island of Ireland. It shouldn't be done by having a hard border down the Irish Sea. It has to be done by some form of negotiated solution that respects the fact that with two potentially different systems, those potentially different systems have to be brought as close together as possible. Now, a sanitary fighter's sanitary agreement is so obvious, so very obvious, because we start from the same premise. There's no member of the governing party, no member of the opposition who are arguing we should deteriorate our SPS conditions in Great Britain. Therefore, a negotiated SPS agreement, as was achieved not simply with New Zealand but also with Switzerland, two different models, but a uniquely UK-EU model, would be perfectly practical. Let's move on that. Let's look at the practical details. Let's look hard at those practical details, because take this away from the heavy rhetoric. See these as being practical problems that can be solved by goodwill, and we can move the situation on. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, I also have got to say, though, that there have been some very powerful voices, I've got to say, on the government benches about the legality of this bill, and that should worry honourable members across this chamber. It's not good enough to compare the Good Friday Agreement and the protocol as if somehow one has to go and the other not. We've got to maintain international law under all circumstances. We've got to do it, because when I stand up and say to people in other countries we have an expectation of those very high standards, I'm right to be able to say, because my country also respects those very high standards, that actually is true patriotism. Real patriotism comes from those measures there, not simply the jingoistic flag waving. So let's say that this really does matter, that we are a law-abiding country, because if we're not a law-abiding country, quite frankly, we let ourselves down, we let the world down. Now that's a really serious issue that we have to confront here tonight. And I would appeal to Right Honourable members opposite to take this very, very seriously. I would appeal to my friends in the DUP on the same basis, because it will affect the way that all of us, people in Northern Ireland, people in the rest of Great Britain, are viewed if we get this wrong. So there's some really difficult issues here. These can be solved, but they will not be solved, Mr Deputy Speaker, by this bill. Not even by amending this bill. What we need to do is get back to that negotiating table, get back with a sense of dealing with practical issues. That is a way forward. It's the sensible way forward.
Sir Robert Buckland.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I have diligently sat throughout this entire debate, and I have to say that I think this House is soberly and carefully examining an issue that isn't just an issue of Brexit, it isn't just an issue of our relationship with the EU, it goes to the heart of the exceptional nature of Northern Ireland and its position within our great United Kingdom. It's exceptional. That was the arrangement that was reached a century ago, whether we like it or not. And it is the consequences of that exceptional position that Northern Ireland is in that has made this particular issue so vexed and so complicated. Having been in government when the final withdrawal agreement was negotiated, I think we all remember, I certainly remember with great clarity, the need in my mind for there to be an agreement with the EU for us to be able to chart a way forward, not just in terms of our withdrawal and the period of grace that we had for the year after our withdrawal, but our subsequent agreement, the trade agreement, which for me is of paramount importance. And therefore it is with very careful and measured thought that I come to this debate, Mr Deputy Speaker, because I do not want to see as an unalloyed pro-European. I still believe in the importance of Britain's role with our friends in Europe and the importance of the maintenance of strong bilateral arrangements, that we should do anything hastily that could jeopardise that important continuing relationship, which is why the words of my right honourable friend, who was then Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, who worked diligently to bring back that executive with great success, his words about the need for Franco-British bilateral discussions to proceed at pace, I think are words that we should heed very strongly, because in my considered view, that is going to be the way that we unlock the sort of negotiation that everybody in this chamber wants to see. And they're right to talk about the need for negotiation. But this is the reality. There is no negotiation. We can't even call it a negotiation, because Maros Sefcovic, working as he does for the Commission, needs political direction from the EU and from its member states, most notably France, in order to be able to even call the discussions that he is having with the United Kingdom a negotiation. That's the reality. And masterly inactivity, although it is sometimes absolutely the right way for nation states to proceed, I'm afraid is not an option for us here. Because masterly inactivity is something that a nation should pursue when it has a position of an advantage. And I'm afraid we don't. Because our essential interests are, I'm afraid, under threat. And we've identified our essential interests here as the maintenance of stable social and political conditions in Northern Ireland, the protection of the 1998 Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and the effective functioning of the unique constitutional structures created under it, and the preservation and fostering of social and economic ties between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. And here's the point, Mr Deputy Speaker, in the short time that I have. A lot has been said about necessity, as if it requires imminent peril, the sort of immediate threat that faces us just outside that door now. Now, nobody's saying that, But necessity in this context doesn't require that degree of imminence. What it requires is a degree of real threat and the growing evidence of a real threat to those essential interests. And I would argue that there is that growing evidence. Clearly, North-South is a matter that is entirely unaffected. The respect that we're showing for the single market is clear. But there is a growing problem when it comes to East-West. And the Honourable Member for Leeds Central put it very well when he talked about the prawn sandwich argument. And I have to say that at a time when there seems to be violent agreement between all the parties of Northern Ireland, indeed all of us in this chamber, that full implementation of the protocol is not what we want to see. Nobody wants that. What on earth are we all arguing about? And I'll give way to my right honourable friend.
Very grateful, right honourable learned friend, who speaks very wisely as ever on these topics, for letting me intervene. He refers to the doctrine of necessity and the test that must be met. He would agree, I think, that whether it be imminent or not, or emerging, there has to be evidence that the high threshold is met. Would he not think that, in common with the approach adopted in the UK Internal Markets Bill, if there is evidence so pressing as to justify a departure from an international agreement with the risks that involved, that should be brought back to this House for the House then to decide in a vote, as was suggested in the Internal Markets Bill, then upon the evidence available to it, a parliamentary lock upon the use of that important step.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I think he makes a powerful case. His amendment to that bill carried in this House in 2020, and I thought it was a very sensible mechanism to allow this House of Commons to have its final say with regard to the implementation of these measures based upon clear evidence. And my point, simply, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that this is not a matter of law. It's not a question of legality or not. I think there's a respectable argument that can be deployed by the British government to assert necessity. This is not the law. This is about the evidence that the government will need to marshal when it comes to demonstrating that point. Now, the government's responsibility is to be a good steward of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. And I'm absolutely clear, and I'm afraid I can't give way any further, that it is paramount that Article 1 of the protocol, which says that its provisions are without prejudice to the Good Friday Agreement, means that the Good Friday Agreement definitely, in my view, as a matter of law, takes precedence. And therefore, any government that fails to act, that sits idly by and ignores the concerns of honourable members opposite, indeed wider community, the wider interests of our kingdom, is failing in its duty. But I say this to the right honourable gentleman, leader of the DUP and his party, that I've listened very carefully to what he said this afternoon, and I would like further clarity as to whether, in his reference to passage of this bill, he means the clearance of this bill through this House, as opposed to the final clearance of the bill in the other place before it returns for final consideration. I'll give way to you.
Well, I thank the right honourable member for giving way. I was very clear in what I said. I want to see progress made in the passage of this bill through the House of Commons. And I want to see steps taken that give us the certainty that we're going to see this legislation moving forward and that Parliament will enact it. In those circumstances, we will respond positively.
Well, I'm extremely grateful to the right honourable gentleman. I know he speaks with conviction and passion about these issues. And I, as a friend of the union, as a unionist to my bones, I say to him and his party, it is time to act. It is time for us to come together if we are going to restore stability, that the mainstream opinion of people in Northern Ireland, for whom politics is not their everyday preoccupation, is crying out for. And what he and his party and I must agree upon is that the United Kingdom must be that source of stability, because if we fail to be that source of stability, then people cannot be blamed if they vote with their feet or vote in another way, God forbid. And that's why I'm taking part of this debate today, Mr Deputy Speaker, because I, as a unionist, feel a responsibility and a stewardship for the United Kingdom that I love. I think Northern Ireland is as British as Wales, where I come from, and as Swindon, where I represent. And it is in the interest of all Conservatives to remember that however difficult tactically this issue might be, however inopportune the moment might be for us to have to make hard and fast decisions, I have judged the position to be of such importance that inaction is not an option for us. And that is why that tonight I urge my colleagues to vote for this bill in the hope and expectation that we see real progress and the stability that the people of Northern Ireland and the people of Britain want and deserve.
Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This bill unilaterally sets aside significant sections of the Northern Ireland Protocol, an international agreement, as we've heard, for which the Prime Minister was quite happy to take credit when he claimed he would get Brexit done in the 2019 election campaign. The Foreign Secretary said the bill is needed to protect the Good Friday Agreement, but dismantling the protocol against the will of the majority of people in Northern Ireland also risks undermining that agreement. She said the protocol needs cross-community consent. Indeed it does. But does she have consent from both communities for this bill? I doubt it. Scant consideration was given to the province by Brexiteers before the referendum, nor thereafter to the fact that, like Scotland, Northern Ireland, the majority voted to remain in the EU. And it is, of course, the UK's exit from the EU rather than the protocol which created the difficult situation for Northern Ireland. This was recognised by the then First Minister, Arlene Foster, when she demanded a special trading arrangement for Northern Ireland shortly after the referendum, a request for special treatment now repudiated by herself and her party. As my colleague, the member for Gordon, has already highlighted, there were only three choices: a border on the island of Ireland, close alignment between UK and EU standards to reduce checks, including a veterinary agreement, or checks carried out at Northern Ireland ports. The return of border infrastructure in Ireland was seen as an unacceptable threat to peace, but it was the Prime Minister's choice of a hard Brexit with maximal divergence from the EU, which inevitably left checks on the Irish sea crossings as the only remaining option. The issues posed by an Irish sea border were clearly highlighted in the government's own impact assessment, which undermines the claim of sudden necessity and means the Prime Minister's claim in December 2019 that there would be no question of there being checks on goods going NI to GB or GB to NI was disingenuous, to say the least. The UK government states there's no need for checks, as current UK regulations are close to those of the EU. Indeed, they are, but they're proposing a bonfire of EU regulations and already negotiating trade deals which would allow lowered standard foods and goods to be imported into the UK. The Prime Minister cites economic failure and the outcome of the recent elections as justification for tearing up the agreement, despite a clear majority of Assembly members supporting the protocol in principle, and recent economic data showing Northern Ireland outperforming Great Britain. Business surveys by the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce show that 2/3 of local businesses have now adapted to the protocol, and 70% claim that they see advantages in their dual position, something the rest of us in the UK have lost.
I will. The Honourable Lady is quite right to say that there is an advantage to business and to the economy of Northern Ireland. And interestingly, last week the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland couldn't tell me that they'd done any economic analysis whatsoever. But when we think of the Minister for Brexit advantages, who said that if they were to introduce a border for imports in the United Kingdom, be an act of self-harm. If that happens, or if that were to happen, it would make it even more obvious that the Northern Ireland Protocol was an economic advantage to Northern Ireland, as they wouldn't be doubly hampered, first by this and then by the second completion of Brexit borders.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. I mean, it's still the case that there's no question there are issues, particularly with the implementation of the protocol. 29% of businesses are still experiencing some difficulties, although those facing serious problems have dropped from 15% to 8% since last year. This improvement over time suggests that some of last year's problems could have been avoided if businesses hadn't only been given a matter of weeks to get ready for last January. But supply chains from GB producers and manufacturers would certainly benefit from technical improvements, particularly to reduce the burden on goods that are purely for sale in Northern Ireland. I think all of us can recognise that. But while the EU proposed mitigations last October, including an express lane for exactly these kind of goods, the UK government hasn't engaged in any discussion since February. So talking about 18 months of solid negotiation is nonsense. And despite the remaining challenges, Northern Ireland business leaders are clear. They seek improvements, but they do not want the protocol removed. The loss of trust in this UK government to honour their commitments is already holding back participation in Horizon Europe, to the detriment of research teams across the UK, especially in Scotland, where they had a disproportionate success rate in landing EU funding. Disapplying almost half the protocol undermines a key part of the withdrawal agreement and runs the risk, as others have said, of provoking a trade war with the EU, further exacerbating the cost of living crisis. The EU would then be likely to place tariffs on UK exports, and as Scotland produces the UK's leading food and drink exports in whisky and salmon, Scottish businesses would face the brunt of such retaliatory action. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is vital the UK and EU get back round the table with all the stakeholders from Northern Ireland to discuss practical improvements to implementation of the protocol, reducing the friction and intrusion to a minimum while keeping the economic benefits for the province. Solutions can only be achieved with willingness, trust and goodwill. But sadly, these are now in very short supply and unlikely to be improved by the Prime Minister's plan to wreck an international agreement he signed less than 3 years ago.
Sir William Cash.